The arrow pierced the blackthorn banner 3 inches from Elara's head, and she didn't even flinch. 6 months ago, she would have screamed. Would have cowered. Would have done exactly what every frightened little Omega was expected to do when death whistled past her ear and embedded itself in the stone wall behind her. But 6 months ago, she'd still believed in destiny, true love, and the benevolence of the moon goddess. 6 months ago, she'd been a fool wearing a silver mark and a future crown like they were guarantees instead of cruel jokes. Now, standing on the ramparts of Thornwood Keep with blood on her hands and war on the horizon, Elara of Grey Hollow, no, Elara Thornwood, the wolf queen of the north, simply turned to face the assassin with a smile that would have made her former best friend proud. "You missed," she said softly, and watched the color drain from the man's face as her mate's massive hand closed around his throat from behind. Cale Thornwood lifted the would-be killer off his feet with casual brutality, his golden eyes blazing with the kind of rage that preceded bloodshed. "Bold of you to attack my queen in her own keep," he growled, his voice carrying across the courtyard below where his warriors had assembled. "Shall I guess who sent you, or will you save us both time?" The assassin's eyes flickered, just once, toward the south. Toward Blackthorn Castle. Toward Prince Aldrich and his copper-haired bride. Toward the life Elara had lost and the war she gained instead. "Put him down, my love," Elara said, placing a hand on Cale's forearm. The new mark on her wrist, the savage wolf wrapped in thorns, pulsed with silver light against his scarred skin. "Let him run back to his master. Let Aldrich know that his former betrothed sends her regards." Cale's grip tightened for a moment, making the assassin wheeze, before he dropped him like refuse. "You have until I count to 10, he said quietly. "After that, my wolves hunt." The man ran. They always did. Elara watched him disappear into the forest, her expression serene, even as Lunar stirred restlessly in her soul. Her wolf had changed in these months, no longer the timid silver wisp that couldn't intimidate a rabbit. Now she was something else entirely, fierce, dangerous, alive in ways she'd never been when bound to Aldrich's mediocrity. "You're too merciful," Cale murmured, pulling her against his chest. Even after half a year, his touch still sent lightning through her veins. The mate bond they shared was nothing like the pallid connection she'd had with Aldrich. This was primal, powerful, and utterly consuming. "I'm strategic," she corrected, tilting her head back to meet his gaze. "Let him tell Aldrich that I'm not the weak little Omega he discarded. Let him tell Seraphina that the woman she betrayed is now queen of the very kingdom they fear most." A slow, predatory smile curved Cale's mouth. "My vicious little mate," he purred and kissed her hard enough to make her forget, temporarily, about revenge and war and the complicated path that had brought her here. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how Elara became the Wolf Queen of the North, how she went from broken and bleeding in the borderlands to standing beside the most feared alpha in 5 kingdoms, we need to go back. Back to 3 days before the betrothal feast, when she was still naive enough to believe that moon-blessed bonds couldn't be broken. Back to when her greatest concern was whether the silver embroidery on her wedding dress was too ostentatious. Back to when she thought Seraphina Blackwood was her dearest friend instead of her greatest enemy. 3 days before the betrayal. "Hold still, or I'll stab you with this needle, and unlike your prince, I won't apologize for causing you pain." Elara laughed, trying not to squirm as Seraphina adjusted the bodice of her wedding dress for the 100th time. They were in Elara's chambers in Blackthorn Castle, surrounded by silks and silver thread and all the trappings of a royal wedding that was supposed to change Elara's life forever. It would, just not in the way she expected. "He's not that bad," Elara protested, though even she could hear the lack of conviction in her voice. Prince Aldrich had been absent lately. Distracted. He'd missed their last 3 dinners, citing urgent matters of state, and when they were together, his eyes seemed to look through her rather than at her. But the mark on her wrist hummed with the bond between them, and that had to mean something. The moon goddess didn't make mistakes. "Not that bad," Seraphina repeated, her green eyes sharp with something Elara couldn't quite name. "Elara, darling, the man barely looks at you. When was the last time he made you feel anything?" Heat crept up Elara's neck. The truth was, Aldrich had kissed her exactly 3 times in 3 years, and each time had felt more like obligation than desire. She'd told herself it was propriety, that he was respecting her virtue, that passion would come after the wedding. She'd told herself a lot of lies. "The wedding is in 3 days," Elara said firmly, smoothing her hands over the silver embroidery she'd spent months perfecting. "Everything will be different once we're officially mated." Serafina made a non-committal sound, her fingers working the laces of the dress with practiced efficiency. She was beautiful today, her copper hair swept up in an elaborate style that made her look like a queen already. Elara felt a familiar pang of inadequacy standing next to her, plain little Elara with her simple brown hair and unremarkable features, her wolf too small to command respect. "You deserve more than not that bad," Serafina said quietly, and for a moment, Elara thought she saw genuine concern in her friend's eyes. "You deserve someone who looks at you like you're the moon and stars. Someone who burns for you." "That's poetry, not reality," Elara replied, stepping away from the fitting. "We can't all have grand passions, Sarah. Some of us have duty and destiny instead." "Destiny," Serafina echoed, something dark flickering across her face. "Yes, destiny certainly has interesting plans for us all." There was something odd in her tone, something that made Lunar stir uneasily, but before Elara could question it, a knock sounded at the door. "Enter," Elara called, expecting her mother or perhaps one of the seamstresses. Instead, Prince Aldrich himself strode in, still wearing his training leathers, his dark hair damp with sweat. He was handsome in a conventional way, strong jaw, broad shoulders, the bearing of a man born to command. Elara had once thought herself lucky to be chosen by him. "My prince," she said, curtsying automatically. 3 years of courtship, and she still didn't know how to act naturally around him. His eyes swept over her in the wedding dress, and something unreadable crossed his face. Not desire. Not joy. Something closer to resignation? "You look lovely," he said, the words perfunctory. Then his gaze shifted to Serafina, and Elara watched something change in his expression. His pupils dilated slightly. His breathing quickened. The air in the room seemed to thicken with a tension that Elara didn't understand, but felt nonetheless. "Lady Serafina," he said, and his voice was different now. Warmer. "You look radiant as always." Serafina's smile was demure, perfect, completely innocent. "You're too kind, Your Highness. I was just helping our bride prepare for her special day." The way she said, "our bride," made it sound like a shared possession rather than a celebration. "I won't keep you," Aldrich said, still not quite looking at Elara. "I came to inform you that I'll be unable to join you for dinner tonight. Father requires my presence at the War Council." Again? The word slipped out before Elara could stop it, and she immediately regretted the note of disappointment in her voice. "I mean, of course. Your duties come first." For a moment, just a heartbeat, guilt flickered across his face. Then Serafina laughed, light and musical, and his attention snapped back to her like a lodestone finding north. "Our Elara is too understanding," Serafina said, moving to stand beside the prince with easy familiarity. "Most brides would be furious at being abandoned so close to their wedding." "I'm not most brides," Elara said quietly, and wasn't that the truth? Most brides didn't have wolves that made children laugh instead of submit. Most brides didn't spend their courtships wondering if they'd ever be enough. "No," Aldrich agreed, and the word felt like both acknowledgement and condemnation. "You're not." He left then, and Serafina followed shortly after, claiming she needed to attend to her own duties. Elara stood alone in her wedding dress, staring at the mark on her wrist, the silver wolf that was supposed to guarantee her happiness, and wondered why she felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. Lunar whispered a warning in her mind, but Elara pushed it away. The moon goddess didn't make mistakes. The moon goddess didn't make mistakes. She repeated it like a prayer, like a shield, like a lie she needed to believe. 3 days later, she would learn the truth. The moon goddess didn't make mistakes. She made lessons. And Elara's education was about to begin in blood and betrayal in a chapel that was supposed to be sacred ground. The day before the wedding. The autumn equinox dawned cold and clear, the kind of morning that promised change whether you wanted it or not. Elara woke with a sense of unease she couldn't name, lunar pacing restlessly in her mind. Something's wrong, her wolf insisted. Can't you smell it? But all Elara could smell was the lavender sachets in her linens and the fierce sweat of her own anxiety about the wedding tomorrow. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with last-minute details and the nagging feeling that she'd forgotten something crucial. The castle was alive with preparation. Servants rushed through the halls carrying flowers and linens. The kitchens were in controlled chaos as they prepared the feast. And somewhere in the East Wing, Prince Aldrich was supposedly reviewing guest lists with his father. Elara had been forbidden from seeing him today. Bad luck, tradition dictated, which meant she had nothing to do but pace her chambers and spiral into increasingly anxious thoughts. "You'll wear a path in the stone," her mother chided, sweeping into the room with her usual brisk efficiency. Lady Margaret of Greyhollow was a practical woman who believed in duty above all else, and she'd been thrilled when Elara's mark had matched the prince's. "You should be resting, daughter. Tomorrow will be exhausting." "I can't rest," Elara admitted, pressing a hand to her chest where her heart hammered like a trapped bird. "Something feels off." Her mother's expression softened slightly. "Wedding nerves. Every bride feels them. Once you're mated and crowned, you'll wonder why you worried at all." Would she? Elara wanted to believe it, but Lunar's continued agitation made it difficult. "Where's Serafina?" Elara asked, realizing she hadn't seen her friend all morning. Usually, Sarah was the first to arrive, bringing gossip and laughter and distraction. A strange expression crossed her mother's face. "Lady Serafina sent word that she's feeling unwell. Something she ate, perhaps. She'll be fine for tomorrow's ceremony." Unwell. Serafina was never unwell. She had the constitution of an ox and the energy of a hunting hound. "I should check on her," Elara said, moving toward the door, but her mother caught her arm. "Leave her be. If she says she needs rest, then rest she shall have. You have enough to worry about without playing nursemaid." There was something in her mother's tone, something sharp and warning, that made Elara pause. But before she could press the issue, a commotion erupted in the courtyard below. They rushed to the window to see riders bearing the crossed swords and wolf banner of the Thornwood clan. The enemy. Here. On the eve of a royal wedding. "What in the moon's name?" her mother breathed, her face going pale. Elara watched as Prince Aldrich strode out to meet them, his hand on his sword hilt. The lead rider dismounted, a massive man with black hair and battle scars who moved like violence barely contained. Even from this distance, Elara could feel the power radiating from him. This wasn't some minor lord or messenger. This was Cale Thornwood himself, the beast of the north. The alpha who'd been at war with their kingdom for 5 years, ever since a border dispute had turned bloody. "This is madness," her mother hissed. "He comes here alone on the eve of your wedding? It's either a trap or what?" Elara whispered, unable to tear her eyes away from the Wolf King. There was something about him, something that made Lunar suddenly stop pacing and pay attention. "Or he's here to make a challenge for you." The words hung in the air like a blade about to fall. In the old ways, the ways that noble society pretended to have outgrown but still whispered about in shadows, an unmated alpha could challenge for a mate bond if he believed the match was false or forced. But that was absurd. Elara's mark matched Aldrich's perfectly. The seers had confirmed it. The moon goddess herself had blessed their union. Hadn't she? Elara pressed her palm against the cool window glass and watched as Cale Thornwood spoke to her betrothed. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see Aldrich's face darken with rage, could see him draw his sword. The Thornwood warriors remained mounted, hands on weapons but not drawing them. This wasn't an attack. This was something else. Something formal and ancient and dangerous. Then Cale did something unexpected. He laughed. It was a deep, mocking sound that carried even to Elara's window, and she watched him turn away from Aldrich with clear dismissal, mounting his horse in one fluid motion. Before he rode away, he looked up, directly at her window. Their eyes met across the distance, and even though it should have been impossible, Even though he was too far away to see clearly, Elara felt something crack open inside her chest. Lunar surged forward with a keen of recognition that made no sense, and for one impossible moment, she swore she saw those golden eyes flash with silver fire. Then he was gone, and Elara was left trembling against the window while her mother made worried sounds about war and politics and the dangers of the Thornwood clan. But all Elara could think was, why did that feel like coming home? That night, unable to sleep, Elara did something she hadn't done in years. She shifted. It was forbidden for ladies to run in wolf form without escort, improper and dangerous, but she needed to feel her wolf, needed to outrun the anxiety clawing at her throat. She slipped from her chambers after midnight, made her way to the eastern gates where she knew the guards were lazy, and let Lunar take control. The transformation was always painful for her. Her wolf was so small, so weak, that forcing the change felt like trying to fit too much soul into too little form. She emerged on 4 legs that trembled, silver fur that seemed to glow in the moonlight, and a body that was more decorative than dangerous. But oh, the freedom. She ran through the blackthorn forests, letting instinct guide her, letting Lunar stretch muscles that spent too much time locked away. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying scents of pine and earth and the distant promise of winter. She ran until her paws ached, until her lungs burned, until the chapel clearing appeared before her like fate. The chapel, where tomorrow she would wed Aldrich before the moon goddess and all the realm. Lunar wanted to turn back, wanted to run anywhere but here, but something pulled Elara forward. Some instinct she didn't understand but couldn't ignore. The chapel doors were open. Light spilled from within, candlelight, warm and inviting. And voices. 2 voices intertwined in sounds that made Elara's blood run cold. She shifted back to human form, her naked body suddenly freezing in the autumn air, and she stumbled forward on numb feet. Later, she would wonder why she looked. Why she didn't just turn away and let ignorance shield her for one more day. But the moon goddess had a lesson to teach, and Elara had no choice but to learn. She pushed the door open wider. And there, beneath the tapestry of the moon goddess blessing the first mated pair, beneath the very image that was supposed to sanctify their own union tomorrow, she found her future. Prince Aldrich. Her betrothed. Her moon-blessed mate. With Seraphina Blackwood bent over the prayer bench, her copper hair falling loose, her head thrown back in ecstasy as he thrust into her from behind. The sound Elara made wasn't quite human. It was the sound of something breaking that could never be repaired. Chapter 2. The Breaking. Time fractured into shards of moments, each one cutting deeper than the last. Seraphina's eyes meeting hers over Aldrich's shoulder, not shocked, not guilty, but triumphant. The wet sound of flesh against flesh that continued for 3 more thrusts before Aldrich realized they weren't alone. The way her best friend's lips curved into a smile even as she gasped with pleasure. The moon tapestry behind them, the goddess's silver thread seeming to mock Elara with its promise of eternal devotion. The cold stone floor beneath her bare feet as her legs finally remembered how to move, stumbling backward. Elara, wait. Aldrich's voice, breathless and panicked, his pants still around his ankles as he tried to extract himself from Seraphina's body. But Elara couldn't move forward or backward. She was frozen, suspended in this nightmare, watching as everything she'd believed in turned to ash before her eyes. Seraphina took her time adjusting her skirts, her movements languid and satisfied. There was no shame in her expression, no remorse. Just that awful, knowing smile that said she'd won a game Elara hadn't even known they were playing. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," Seraphina said, her voice carrying false sweetness like poison and honey. "But really, darling, did you think a man like Aldrich would be satisfied with you?" She gestured at Elara's naked form, and somehow made vulnerability look like inadequacy. The words unlocked something in Elara's throat. "We're mated," she whispered, holding up her wrist where the silver wolf mark gleamed in the candlelight. "The moon goddess chose us. You watched it happen. You were there when the marks appeared." "The moon goddess," Seraphina interrupted with a laugh that scraped like glass, "is a romantic fool. She pairs wolves based on some cosmic notion of balance and destiny, but she doesn't account for desire, for passion, for what a man actually needs in his bed and at his side. Aldrich had finally managed to make himself decent, his face flushed with a combination of exertion and something that might have been shame if Elara squinted hard enough. "Serafina, that's enough. Is it?" Serafina turned to him, placing a proprietary hand on his chest. The gesture was deliberate, territorial, and utterly devastating. "Or shall we continue lying to her? Shall we let her walk down that aisle tomorrow and pretend you haven't been in my bed every night for the past 6 months? 6 months. The words hit like a physical blow. Elara's knees buckled, and she caught herself on the doorframe, her mind racing backward through the calendar. 6 months ago was when Aldrich had started becoming distant. When he'd stopped kissing her. When he'd begun missing their dinners and avoiding her touch. When Serafina had become suspiciously attentive, always there to comfort Elara about her inattentive betrothed, always offering excuses for his behavior. "You played me," Elara breathed, looking at her former friend with new eyes. "This whole time you've been taking what I wanted," Serafina finished unapologetically. "What I deserved. Do you know what it's like, Elara, being the capable one, the strong one, the one who should have been chosen, but watching destiny hand everything to you just because you were born with a matching mark? You, with your weak wolf and your gentle nature and your complete inability to command respect. Each word was a carefully aimed arrow, and they all found their mark. The nobility already mock you," Serafina continued, circling Elara like a predator toying with wounded prey. "They call you the fragile princess behind your back. They take bets on how long you'll survive the political games of court. They wonder how someone so small could possibly produce strong heirs." "Stop." Aldrich's voice was sharp, but he didn't move to defend Elara. Didn't step between them. Didn't tell Serafina she was wrong. Because she wasn't wrong, and they all knew it. "I'm telling her the truth," Serafina said, her green eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "The truth you've been too cowardly to speak. You don't love her, Aldrich. You've never loved her. The only reason you've tolerated this engagement is because you thought you had to, because of some dusty old prophecy and a mark that means nothing against real chemistry." Elara's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She looked at Aldrich, her betrothed, her future husband, the man the moon goddess herself had chosen, and waited for him to deny it. To tell Serafina she was wrong. To choose Elara the way destiny had decreed. He met her eyes, and in that moment, she saw the truth that would haunt her for months to come. He looked relieved. Relieved to have the lie finally exposed. Relieved to stop pretending. "She's right," he said quietly, and those 2 words rewrote Elara's entire existence. "You're too gentle for what a future queen requires, Elara. The kingdom needs strength. The court needs someone who can navigate the politics, who can command respect through more than just a prophesied bond. Someone who doesn't make you look pathetic by comparison." Elara's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through his excuses like a blade. Shame flickered across his face, just for a moment, before Serafina leaned into him, and whatever conscience he'd momentarily located disappeared back into the void. "The wedding is tomorrow," Elara said numbly, trying to find purchase in logistics when her entire world was crumbling. "The guests have arrived. The feast is prepared. The nobility from 5 kingdoms are expecting." "Then we'll tell them there's been a change of bride," Serafina interrupted smoothly, as if she'd been planning this speech for months. Which, Elara realized with dawning horror, she probably had. The moon goddess works in mysterious ways. Perhaps she made a mistake with the first matching. Perhaps the true bond was always meant to be between Aldrich and myself. "You can't," Elara started, but Serafina cut her off with a laugh. "Can't I? Watch me. I'm fertile, powerful, politically connected through my father's position. I have a wolf that makes men submit and women envy. I have everything you lack, Elara. Everything a true queen needs. And you have me," Aldrich added, finally stepping forward to stand beside Serafina in a united front that made bile rise in Elara's throat. "I choose Serafina. Bond or no bond, mark or no mark, I choose her." The words should have hurt less because Elara had already heard the worst. But somehow, hearing him say it explicitly, hearing him choose another woman over destiny itself, carved out something vital from her chest. Lunar was howling now, a sound of anguish that echoed through Elara's bones. The bond with Aldrich, that golden thread she'd felt humming beneath her skin for 3 years, pulled taut with agony. "You can't just choose," Elara said desperately, holding up her marked wrist. "The moon goddess." "The moon goddess," Aldrich interrupted coldly, "can be overruled. There are ancient rites, old magics that predate even the first shifters. The rite of severance. The breaking of false bonds. My father's priests have already confirmed it can be done." "False bonds?" Elara's voice cracked. "We've been marked since we were 16. How is that false?" "Because I never wanted you." The words exploded from Aldrich with a viciousness that made even Seraphina's eyes widen slightly. "Because I've spent 3 years pretending to feel something I never felt. Because every time I looked at you, all I saw was obligation and duty and a future I didn't choose. And then I met Seraphina, really met her, not just as her friend but as a woman, and I finally understood what desire actually feels like." The chapel spun around Elara. She was going to be sick. She was going to collapse. She was going to. "I invoke the rite of severance," Aldrich declared, his voice taking on the formal cadence of ritual magic. "Before the goddess and these holy walls, before the tapestry of the first mating and the altar of the moon, I release Elara of Grey Hollow from our bond. I reject her as my mate. I sever the tie that binds us." The magic that followed was unlike anything Elara had experienced. The mark on her wrist didn't just fade, it burned. Silver fire erupted across her skin, searing the wolf mark into a twisted scar. The bond between her and Aldrich, that golden thread she'd carried for 3 years, snapped with a violence that drove her to her knees. She screamed. The sound was raw and animal, echoing off the chapel's stone walls, and she felt Lunar retreat so far into their shared soul that Elara wondered if her wolf had simply died from heartbreak. The pain was excruciating, but worse than the physical agony was the emptiness that followed. The space where the bond had lived suddenly gaped hollow and cold, a wound that no healer could stitch closed. Through her blurred vision, she saw Aldrich stagger backward, pressing a hand to his chest. The severance hurt him too, that was some comfort at least. But Seraphina was there immediately, supporting him, whispering soothing words into his ear while Elara bled on the chapel floor. "You should go," Seraphina said, looking down at Elara with something that might have been pity if it weren't so clearly victory. "Go back to Grey Hollow. Find some minor lord who'll overlook your inadequacies. Live a quiet life. Be grateful we're letting you leave with your dignity intact." "Dignity?" Elara's laugh was broken glass. "You think I have any dignity left? You've taken everything. My mate. My crown. My future. My friend. What dignity is there in being discarded like refuse?" "More dignity than staying where you're not wanted," Seraphina replied coldly. "The wedding will proceed tomorrow as planned. Just with a different bride. The guests will understand. The court will adapt. And you." She paused, her smile turning cruel. "You'll be forgotten. A footnote in history. The weak little wolf who wasn't enough for her prince." Elara wanted to rage. Wanted to fight. Wanted to shift and tear out Seraphina's throat and make Aldrich choke on his betrayal. But Lunar was gone, silent and broken, and Elara had never been strong enough to fight anyone, let alone 2 people who'd orchestrated her destruction so perfectly. So she did what she'd always done when the world became too much. She ran. She stumbled out of the chapel, still naked, her body shaking with shock and pain. The autumn air bit into her skin, but she barely felt it beneath the inferno of the severed bond. Her feet carried her instinctively through the castle grounds, past the shocked faces of guards who averted their eyes from the naked, crying woman fleeing through their midst. She should have gone to her chambers. Should have told her mother what happened. Should have demanded justice from the king himself. Breaking a moon-blessed bond was heresy, punishable by death in the old laws. But Elara had spent her entire life being the good girl, the quiet girl, the girl who made herself smaller so others could be larger. And in this moment of ultimate betrayal, she found she had no fight left in her. So she ran toward the only place that made sense, away. The borderlands beckoned like an open grave, and Elara, broken, betrayed, bonds severed, walked into them willingly. The forest swallowed her whole. She had no sense of time, no awareness of direction. She just moved forward on bleeding feet, her body operating on instinct while her mind spiraled through the wreckage of her life. The trees grew denser, older, twisted by magic that predated kingdoms and civilization. This was the wild space between realms, where ancient things still breathed and smart wolves didn't tread. Rogues lived here. Bandits. Worse things that had no names. Elara didn't care. Let them come. Let them kill her. It would be kinder than living with this hollow agony in her chest. She walked until dawn painted the sky in shades of blood and gold. Walked until her legs gave out, and she collapsed beside a stream that glowed faintly silver in the morning light, some residual magic from the earth itself. The water was crystalline and cold, and Elara stared into its depths, seeing her reflection, wild-eyed, tear-stained, marked by a scar where destiny should have been. Perhaps drowning would be poetic, she thought distantly. The moon goddess could watch her chosen daughter sink. Do it, she whispered to her reflection. You weren't strong enough to keep him. Weren't enough to make him love you. Weren't enough to deserve the destiny you were promised. What's the point of living if you're just going to be a footnote in someone else's story? Her reflection didn't answer, but Lunar stirred weakly in her soul. Not quite dead, then. Just broken. Elara reached for the water, ready to let the current take her, when the growl shattered the morning quiet. It was low, dangerous, absolutely primal, the sound a predator makes when it's found prey. She turned, still on her knees, and saw him emerge from the shadows like vengeance given form. He was enormous, taller than any man she'd ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to carry kingdoms. His hair was black as a raven's wing, worn long and wild, with small braids woven with bones and silver rings that caught the light. Scars decorated his bare chest like a tapestry of violence, sword cuts, claw marks, burns that spoke of battles survived and enemies defeated. But it was his eyes that held her frozen, molten gold with silver flecks, ancient and knowing, the eyes of a wolf who'd walked through fire and emerged stronger. The mark on his chest was unmistakable, the crossed swords and wolf of the Thornwood clan. The enemy. The rival kingdom her people had been at war with for 5 years. His clothes were spattered with blood fresh, she noted with distant calm, and a massive claymore hung across his back. This wasn't some minor warrior or border scout. This was Cale Thornwood himself, the beast of the north. The wolfgang who'd slaughtered 3 of Aldrich's best knights in single combat just 2 months ago. The man she'd seen yesterday in the courtyard, the one who'd looked up at her window with eyes that saw too much. You reek of tears and broken bonds, little wolf, he said, his accent thick and foreign, turning common tongue into something almost musical. Northern dialect, rough and untamed. This is dangerous territory for a woman alone. Particularly one who smells like Blackthorn Castle. His lip curled on the last words, and Elara realized he could probably scent Aldrich on her skin. Could probably smell the whole sordid story written in her sweat and tears and the severed bond that marked her as rejected goods. Then kill me and be done with it, Elara said, her voice hollow. You're at war with my kingdom anyway. One less wolf from Blackthorn should please you. His eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer. She should have been terrified. This man was legendary for his brutality in battle, for the way he showed no mercy to his enemies. But Elara had already survived the worst pain imaginable tonight. What was death compared to betrayal? I don't kill broken things, he said quietly, crouching down to her level. Up close, she could see the intelligence in those golden eyes, the sharp assessment that missed nothing. I fix them. Or I use them. Sometimes both. I'm not broken, Elara lied. I'm just... You're shattered, he interrupted bluntly. I can smell it on you. A severed mate bond, fresh within hours. Someone rejected you. His nostrils flared, and his expression darkened. Someone rejected a moon-blessed bond, which is heresy and stupidity in equal measure. Prince Aldrich, Elara heard herself say, and wasn't sure why she was confessing to her enemy. My betrothed. We were to be married today. The feast is probably starting right now, actually. They're just using a different bride. Something dangerous flashed across Kale's face. Aldrich, he repeated slowly, tasting the name like poison. The pampered princeling who plays at war from behind castle walls. That Aldrich. He's not. Elara started to defend him, then stopped. Why was she defending the man who destroyed her? Yes, that Aldrich. And who was the replacement bride? My best friend, Seraphina Blackwood. Kale's laugh was sudden and sharp, completely void of humor. Of course. A political marriage wrapped in a pretty lie. Let me guess, she's well-connected, fertile, has a wolf that makes men submit. The accuracy of his assessment made Elara flinch. You know her? I know her type, he corrected. Ambitious women who see men as stepping stones to power. I've killed enough of them in battle to recognize the breed. He tilted his head, studying her with unnerving intensity. But you're different. You actually believed in the bond. In destiny. In the pretty lies they tell omegas about true love and fated mates. Don't mock me, Elara whispered, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I know I was a fool. I know I was weak and naive and not enough. You don't need to. Her words cut off as his hand shot out, gripping her chin and forcing her to meet his eyes. His touch was surprisingly gentle despite the calluses, despite the blood on his hands. Listen carefully, little wolf, he said, his voice low and intense. You are not the fool. They were. A man who breaks a moon-blessed bond is either cursed or an idiot, usually both. And a woman who steals her friend's mate? That's not strength. That's opportunism masquerading as ambition. The validation should have meant nothing coming from her enemy, but somehow it cracked something open in Elara's chest. She sobbed, great, heaving gasps that shook her entire frame, and Kale Thornwood, the beast of the north, the man who'd killed dozens of her countrymen, simply held her chin steady and let her break. I have nowhere to go, she finally managed through her tears. I can't go back to the castle. My family will be ashamed. The court will mock me. I'm a rejected omega with a scarred bond and no future. I'm nothing. Wrong, Kale said firmly. You're mine. And then the bond snapped into place. Not gently. Not with the predetermined inevitability of her bond with Aldrich. This was a cataclysm, lightning and thunder, and the raw power of the wild itself crashing through every cell in her body. It was titanium cables wrapped in fire, a connection so powerful it literally drove her backward into the stream. Kale caught her before she went under, pulling her against his chest, and Elara felt his whole body go rigid with shock. His eyes bled from gold to pure silver, and she watched his wolf surge forward, something ancient and terrifying and utterly primal. And Lunar, her broken, timid wolf who'd retreated into silence after the severance, suddenly roared back to life with a ferocity Elara had never felt. Her wolf surged forward to meet his, not cowering, not submitting, but challenging, matching his dominance with something fierce and wild that Elara didn't know she possessed. Mate, Kale breathed, and the word was a prayer and a promise and a threat all at once. The silver mark bloomed on Elara's wrist, erasing the scar Aldrich had left. But it wasn't the delicate wolf she'd carried before. This was a savage beast wrapped in thorns and moonlight, all teeth and claws and untamed power. On Kale's chest, just over his heart, the matching mark appeared in silver fire, the same thorned wolf, claiming him as thoroughly as he was claiming her. Elara stared up at him, water dripping from her hair, her body pressed against his scarred chest, and felt something dark and hungry unfurl inside her. This bond was nothing like the pallid connection she'd had with Aldrich. This was consuming, demanding, absolute. This was the bond that started wars and ended kingdoms. I don't understand, she whispered, even as her body understood perfectly, already responding to his nearness in ways that made heat pool in her belly. The moon goddess already matched me. How can there be another bond? Kale's smile was slow and predatory. Because, little wolf, your first bond was a lie. A political convenience that the goddess tolerated but never blessed with her full power. This? He pressed his palm against her chest, over her racing heart, his mark burning against her mark. This is a true mating. This is what destiny actually looks like when she stops being polite and starts being honest. But you're my enemy, Elara protested weakly, even as every instinct screamed at her to submit to this bond, to let it consume her. Our kingdoms are at war. You've killed my countrymen. And your former betrothed, killed mine, Kale interrupted, his expression darkening. War makes enemies of us all, little wolf. But the moon goddess doesn't care about politics. She cares about balance. Strength matching strength. And you. His thumb traced the new mark on her wrist, sending electricity through her veins. You're stronger than you know. Stronger than they let you be. I'm the weakest Omega in Blackthorn, Elara said bitterly. My wolf was a joke. I can't even. Your wolf was suppressed, Kale corrected, his eyes blazing. Held back by a false bond and a man who needed you weak to feel strong. But I can feel her now, little mate. She's not weak. She's been waiting. As if in response to his words, Lunar surged forward again, and this time Elara didn't fight her. She let her wolf rise, let that fierce, wild thing show herself, and watched Kale's expression transform into something between awe and hunger. There she is, he murmured. My savage little queen. I'm not a queen, Elara said, but the words lacked conviction. Not yet, Kale agreed, pulling her fully from the water and into his arms. But you will be. Because I'm taking you home, little wolf. To Thornwood Keep. To my territory. And I'm going to show you what you're actually capable of when you stop trying to be small. They'll call it kidnapping, Elara pointed out, even as her body melted against his, the bond singing with rightness. Let them, Kale said dismissively. Let your prince and his copper-haired bride explain to the court how he rejected a moon-blessed bond on his wedding day. Let them explain why his discarded mate bonded immediately to his greatest enemy. The scandal alone will be delicious. Despite everything, the pain, the betrayal, the shattered life, Elara felt a smile tug at her lips. You want to use me for political advantage? I want to use you for many things, Kale replied with devastating honesty. Political advantage is just the beginning. But first, he shrugged off his leather coat and wrapped it around her naked body. First, I'm getting you warm, fed, and safe. Then we'll discuss revenge. Revenge, Elara repeated, testing the word. It should have tasted bitter, but instead it tasted like possibility. Oh yes, Kale's smile was absolutely wicked. Did you think I'd let them get away with breaking you? Little wolf, I'm going to make Prince Aldrich regret the day he rejected his true mate. And when I'm done, Seraphina Blackwood will wish she'd chosen a different prize to steal. He lifted her effortlessly, cradling her against his chest as he began walking deeper into the borderlands, toward Thornwood territory, toward enemy lands, toward a future that Elara couldn't even imagine. She should have protested. Should have fought. Should have reminded him that she'd just been betrayed and broken and maybe needed time before diving into another bond with another powerful alpha who'd probably hurt her just as badly. But Lunar was purring, actually purring, for the first time in Elara's life. And the bond between them felt like coming home after a lifetime of being lost. I lost a prince, Elara murmured against Kale's chest. No, he corrected, his voice rumbling through her. You escaped a prison. The moon goddess has given you a king. And as they crossed into Thornwood territory, as Kale's warriors emerged from the trees and fell into formation around their alpha and his new mate, Elara realized something that would have seemed impossible just hours ago. Her story wasn't ending. It was finally beginning. Chapter 3. The Wolf Queen's Awakening. Thornwood Keep rose from the northern mountains like a fong of black stone, all sharp angles and defensive brutality. It was nothing like the elegant spires of Blackthorn Castle with their silver pennants and manicured gardens. This was a fortress built for war, surrounded by ancient forests where wolves the size of horses roamed and the very air thrummed with primal magic. Elara had fallen asleep in Kale's arms during the journey, exhaustion finally claiming her after the night's trauma. She woke to find herself in a massive bed covered in furs, wearing a soft linen shift that wasn't hers, in a room lit by a roaring fireplace that could have fit 3 men standing upright. For a moment, one blissful, drowsy moment, she forgot everything that had happened. Then memory crashed back like a tidal wave, Aldrich and Seraphina in the chapel, The severance, the pain, the flight into the borderlands, and Kale. The bond. The new mark on her wrist that pulsed with silver fire even now. She sat up too quickly, her head spinning, and immediately regretted it. Easy, little wolf. Kale's voice came from the shadows near the fireplace. He was sitting in a chair that seemed too small for his frame, wearing only leather breeches, his scarred chest gleaming in the firelight. You've been through enough without adding a concussion to the list. How long was I asleep? Elara's voice was hoarse, and she realized her throat hurt from all the crying and screaming. 6 hours. It's late afternoon now. He rose with fluid grace and crossed to the bed, carrying a tray laden with bread, cheese, dried meat, and a steaming mug that smelled like herbs and honey. You need to eat. The severance and new bond formation together? That burns energy like nothing else. I'm surprised you're even conscious. Elara accepted the tray with shaking hands, suddenly aware that she was ravenous. She tore into the bread like a feral thing, and Kale watched with something like approval in his golden eyes. Where am I? She asked between bites. My chambers. The safest place in Thornwood Keep, which makes it the safest place in the north. He settled onto the edge of the bed, close enough that she could feel his body heat, smell the pine and smoke scent that was uniquely his. My warriors are loyal, but rumors travel. Better to keep you here until we figure out our strategy. Strategy, Elara repeated, the word feeling foreign in her mouth. She'd spent her entire life being part of other people's strategies, never creating her own. For what? For announcing that the Wolf King of the North has claimed a new mate, Kale said simply. For dealing with the inevitable response from your former kingdom. For preparing you to be what you were always meant to be. And what's that? His smile was sharp as broken glass. Dangerous. The word sent a shiver down her spine, fear and excitement tangled together. I'm not dangerous. I'm the weakest. If you finish that sentence, I'm going to have to do something drastic to prove you wrong, Kale interrupted, his tone light but his eyes serious. You need to stop thinking like a Blackthorn Omega and start thinking like a Thornwood Queen. I don't know how to be a queen, Elara admitted, setting down the half-eaten bread. I barely knew how to be a future princess, and look how that turned out. Kale's expression softened slightly. What happened to you wasn't a failure, little wolf. It was a revelation. Aldrich showed you exactly who he was, a weak man who needed a weaker mate to feel strong. Seraphina showed you that loyalty can be purchased with ambition. And the moon goddess showed you that sometimes destiny needs a course correction. Some correction, Elara muttered, touching the new mark on her wrist. The thorned wolf seemed to move under her skin, alive in ways her previous mark never had been. She matched me with my kingdom's enemy. She matched you with your equal, Kale corrected, reaching out to trace the mark with one calloused finger. The touch sent electricity racing through her veins, and she saw his pupils dilate in response. Do you feel that? That's not some polite, predetermined connection. That's raw power. That's what a true bond feels like when it's not being suppressed by obligation and duty. Elara did feel it, a thrumming awareness of him that seemed to bypass her brain entirely and speak directly to her wolf. Lunar was awake now, more present than she'd ever been, and completely fixated on the massive alpha sitting inches away. Why did you come to Blackthorn Castle yesterday? Elara asked suddenly, remembering how he'd looked up at her window. It wasn't a coincidence, was it? Kale's smile turned predatory. No. I came to assess my enemy's weakness before the wedding. I wanted to see the woman Aldrich had chosen, understand what kind of queen would rule beside him. He paused, his eyes boring into hers. Then I saw you at the window, and my wolf went absolutely feral. I didn't understand why at the time. I thought maybe it was just because you looked so miserable standing there, or because I could smell the false bond even from that distance. But now I know. Know what? That my wolf recognized his mate before I did. That the moon goddess was already laughing at all of us, waiting for her little drama to play out. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek. I rode back to my camp furious and confused, unable to stop thinking about a woman I'd only glimpsed for a moment. And then, this morning, when I was scouting the borderlands, there you were, broken and bleeding and absolutely perfect. Perfect, Elara scoffed. I was naked and crying in a stream, contemplating drowning myself. That's not perfect. That's pathetic. That's survival, Kale said firmly. You were betrayed in the worst way possible, had your bond severed, which is excruciatingly painful, by the way, and instead of letting it destroy you completely, you ran. You put distance between yourself and the people who hurt you. That's not pathetic, little wolf. That's a survivor's instinct. Elara wanted to believe him, but years of being told she was too weak, too gentle, too small had carved deep grooves in her psyche. My wolf is tiny. I can barely shift without pain. I've never won a challenge, never commanded respect, never. Because they were suppressing you, Kale interrupted, his voice hard with conviction. A false bond doesn't just connect two wolves, it shapes them. Aldrich needed you weak to maintain his superiority. Every time you tried to be strong, every time Lunar tried to assert herself, the bond would have pushed back, keeping you in your place. You've been fighting against your own destiny for 3 years, and the fact that you survived that at all tells me exactly how strong you actually are. The words unlocked something in Elara's chest, a possibility she'd never considered. What if her weakness hadn't been inherent? What if it had been imposed? How do I fix it? She whispered. You embrace who you actually are instead of who they told you to be, Kale said simply. You let Lunar fully emerge without the false bond holding her back. You train. You learn. You become the queen the Thornwood clan deserves. I don't know if I can. Then I'll teach you. He stood, offering her his hand. Starting now. Get dressed, there are clothes in the wardrobe. Meet me in the courtyard in 10 minutes. For what? His smile was absolutely wicked. Your first lesson in being dangerous. The courtyard of Thornwood Keep was packed with warriors when Elara descended the stone stairs 10 minutes later, wearing leather breeches and a tunic that actually fit her properly, unlike the restrictive gowns she'd worn at Blackthorn. Her hair was still a mess, and she had no cosmetics to hide the evidence of her crying, but something about the practical clothing made her feel slightly more capable. The assembled wolves stopped their sparring to stare as she approached, and Elara felt the familiar urge to shrink, to make herself smaller, to apologize for existing. Then Kale appeared beside her, placing a possessive hand at the small of her back, and the warriors immediately dropped to one knee. This is Elara Thornwood, Kale announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard with alpha command. My mate. Your queen. Any wolf who shows her disrespect answers to me personally. Understood. A chorus of yes, alpha rumbled through the assembled warriors, and Elara felt something shift inside her. These weren't the polished courtiers of Blackthorn who'd mocked her behind silk fans and whispered about her inadequacy. These were battle-hardened fighters who'd survived wars and winters and the brutal politics of the North. And they were bowing to her. Can you shift? Kale asked quietly, meant only for her ears. Yes, but... No buts. Shift. Now. Show them your wolf. Panic clawed at Elara's throat. Her wolf was small and weak and would only confirm what everyone suspected, that she wasn't fit to be queen. Kale, I can't. She's not. She's not what they made her, Kale interrupted firmly. Trust me, little wolf. Trust your mate. Shift. Against every instinct screaming at her to refuse, Elara reached for Lunar. And found something completely different than before. The shift that had always been painful, that had always felt like forcing too much soul into too little body, suddenly flowed like water. Power surged through her veins, not borrowed from the bond, but amplified by it. She felt Kale's strength bleeding into her, supporting her, and beneath it all, Lunar's presence was massive and fierce and utterly unlike the timid creature she'd known. The transformation completed, and Elara stood on 4 legs, feeling the cobblestones beneath her paws, the evening air cold against her fur. But something was wrong. The courtyard looked smaller somehow. The warriors who'd seemed intimidating moments ago were now eye level or lower. She turned to find a water trough and caught her reflection in its still surface. The wolf staring back was not the delicate silver wisp she'd carried for years. This wolf was massive, not quite as large as Kale would be, but easily twice the size of her previous form. Her fur was still silver, but now it was shot through with darker threads like storm clouds, and her Her eyes glowed with an eerie light that seemed to see straight through flesh to something deeper. This was the wolf that had been trapped beneath a false bond. This was what Lunar had always meant to be. Holy shit, Elara thought, and felt Lunar's savage satisfaction echo through their shared consciousness. There she is. Kale's voice was thick with approval. He shifted in a fluid motion that spoke of countless transformations, and his wolf emerged, massive and black as midnight, with those unsettling golden eyes. He was still larger than her, but not by the margin she'd expected. They looked like equals. They looked like mates. Kale's wolf circled hers, assessing, and Elara felt the urge to submit, to lower herself, to show her belly. That's what she'd always done when confronted with dominant wolves. But Lunar snarled instead, a warning that made several warriors step back and met Kale's assessment with challenge instead of deference. His wolf's eyes flashed with something between surprise and desire, and then he was lunging. Elara's instinct was to dodge, to flee, but Lunar held her ground. When Kale crashed into her, instead of being bowled over, she twisted at the last second and used his momentum against him, sending them both tumbling across the courtyard in a tangle of fur and teeth. They rolled to a stop with Elara somehow on top, her jaws at his throat, her body pinning his, which should have been impossible given their size difference. But Kale hadn't been trying to dominate her. He'd been testing her, challenging her to fight back instead of submit. And she'd passed. The assembled warriors erupted in cheers and howls, clearly delighted by their queen's display. Kale shifted back to human form beneath her, forcing Elara to shift as well or risk accidentally killing him, and suddenly she was straddling his bare chest in the middle of the courtyard, both of them naked and breathing hard. "There's my savage queen," Kale said, his eyes blazing with pride and something hotter. "Did you feel that? That strength was always yours. The bond just gave you permission to use it." Elara was shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer rush of power still singing through her veins. "I pinned you. I actually pinned an alpha." "You pinned the Wolf King," Kale corrected with a grin. "Which means you're exactly as dangerous as I said you were." Now he flipped them effortlessly, reversing their positions so he loomed over her, his body a wall of heat and muscle. "Let's discuss what happens next." Next? Elara's brain was still trying to process what had just happened, and his proximity wasn't helping. The bond was screaming at her to close the distance, to claim and be claimed, to finish what the moon goddess had started. "Next, we announce our mating to the realm," Kale said, his voice dropping to a rumble that she felt in her bones. "We send word to every kingdom, including Blackthorn, that you are mine and I am yours. We let them know that the woman Prince Aldrich discarded is now the Wolf Queen of the North." And then his smile turned absolutely feral. "We prepare for war." "War," Elara repeated numbly. "Because of me?" "Because of stupidity," Kale corrected, finally rolling off her and offering her a hand up. A subordinate quickly brought them cloaks, and they covered themselves while the warriors discreetly returned to their training. Aldrich broke a moon-blessed bond and rejected his true mate. That's heresy by the old laws. It gives us legal justification to challenge his rule. "You want to invade Blackthorn?" It wasn't a question. "I want to make him regret hurting you," Kale said bluntly. "But more than that, I want to show the realm what happens when you spit on destiny. The moon goddess blessed you with 2 bonds, one false, one true. Aldrich rejected the first, which freed you for the second. Every seer, every priest, every wolf who still honors the old ways will see this as divine judgment." Elara's mind was reeling. "They'll say you manipulated me. That you took advantage of a broken, vulnerable woman. That the bond isn't real. Then we'll prove them wrong," Kale said simply. "The marks don't lie, Elara. Neither does the strength you just showed. You're not a victim who needs rescue. You're a queen who's finally found her throne." "I'm a woman who was betrayed yesterday," Elara countered, some of her old uncertainty creeping back. "I don't know if I'm ready to be anyone's queen. I don't know if I'm ready to start a war. I don't know if—" Kale's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Then don't be ready. Be angry instead. Be furious at the people who made you believe you were weak. Be vengeful toward the friend who stole your future. Be absolutely wrathful at the prince who threw away his destiny because he was too much of a coward to stand beside a strong woman. I'm not strong, Elara whispered. You pinned a wolfgang in front of his entire pack, Kale reminded her. You shifted into a form twice the size of what you were yesterday. You survived a bond severance that would have killed weaker wolves. You're standing here, breathing, fighting, when you should be broken beyond repair. If that's not strength, little wolf, then I don't know what is. The words settled into her chest like stones, heavy and solid and real. Maybe she wasn't ready to believe in her own strength yet. But Kale believed it. Lunar believed it. The bond itself seemed to hum with certainty. Maybe that was enough to start with. What if I fail? She asked quietly. What if I can't be what you need? What if? Then we fail together, Kale said simply. That's what mates do. But I've been leading the Thornwood clan for 10 years, Elara. I've fought in dozens of battles, faced enemies who wanted me dead, survived assassination attempts and political coups, and every kind of betrayal you can imagine. And I'm still here. Do you know why? Why? Because I only invest in things that are worth the risk. And you, he pressed his palm against her chest, over her racing heart, are worth every risk, every war, every consequence that comes from claiming you as mine. The vulnerability in his words, the raw honesty, cracked something open in Elara's chest. This wasn't Aldrich's lukewarm duty or Seraphina's calculated manipulation. This was a man who'd built a kingdom on blood and determination, and he was offering it to her without conditions. I want them to hurt, Elara admitted in a whisper. Aldrich and Seraphina. I want them to regret what they did to me. Does that make me a terrible person? It makes you human, Kale said. And wolf. And mine. Revenge isn't noble, little wolf, but it's honest. And I'd rather have your honest fury than polite submission. Then teach me, Elara said, feeling something dark and fierce unfurl in her chest. Teach me how to be dangerous. Teach me how to be a queen. Teach me how to make them regret the day they underestimated me. Kale's smile was absolutely savage. With pleasure. But first, he pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers, the bond singing between them. We complete the mating bond properly. We seal it in front of witnesses under the full moon, with all the old ceremonies. We make it so absolute, so undeniable, that no one can question its legitimacy. When? Tonight. The full moon rises in 3 hours, and I'm not waiting another day to make you mine in every way that matters. His eyes blazed with hunger that had nothing to do with food. Unless you need more time? I won't rush you if. Tonight, Elara interrupted, surprised by the certainty in her voice. Aldrich had made her wait 3 years for a wedding that never happened, afraid of scandal, obsessed with propriety. Kale was offering her a choice, offering her agency, offering her everything. Tonight, I become Elara Thornwood. Tonight, I stop being the woman they broke and become the queen they'll fear. There's my savage mate, Kale murmured, and kissed her hard enough to make her forget, temporarily, about anything other than the taste of him and the feel of his hands in her hair and the bond that burned like silver fire between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, the warriors in the courtyard were very carefully not watching while also definitely listening. Go, Kale said roughly. My sister will help you prepare for the ceremony. I have arrangements to make and messages to send. And Elara. He caught her hand as she turned to leave. Thank you. For what? For surviving. For being here. For being strong enough to let yourself be dangerous. He pressed a kiss to the mark on her wrist, and she felt the bond pulse with affection and desire and something deeper that she wasn't ready to name. The moon goddess gave me a gift when she gave me you. I won't waste it. Elara walked back toward the keep on trembling legs, her mind churning with everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Yesterday, she'd been a dutiful bride-to-be, counting down hours until a wedding that should have been the happiest day of her life. Today, she was a mate to her kingdom's greatest enemy, preparing for a ceremony that would seal her fate and probably start a war. Tomorrow? Tomorrow, she would figure out how to be the queen that Kale believed she could be. And eventually, she would return to Blackthorn and show Prince Aldrich and Lady Seraphina exactly what they'd thrown away. But first, she had a mating ceremony to survive and a bond to complete. First, she had to become Elara Thornwood. The weak little wolf of Greyhollow was dead. Long live the Wolf Queen of the North. Chapter 4. The Moon's Judgment. The ceremonial chamber beneath Thornwood Keep was older than kingdoms, carved from living stone by the first shifters who'd walked these lands. Silver veins ran through the black rock like frozen lightning, and the ceiling opened to the sky, letting moonlight pour down onto the ancient altar where countless matings had been sealed over millennia. Elara stood at the entrance, her heart hammering, wearing a dress that was nothing like the silver-threaded monstrosity she'd embroidered for Eldrick. This was simple, white leather that moved like water, trimmed with fur at the shoulders and hem. Her hair had been braided with silver cord by Kale's sister, Astrid, who'd proven surprisingly gentle despite looking like she could kill a man with her bare hands. "You look terrified," Astrid observed, adjusting the final braid. She was tall and fierce, with the same black hair as Kale, but eyes the color of steel. "That's normal. Mating ceremonies are intense even under the best circumstances, and you're doing this less than a day after being bond severed. Most wolves would still be in bed, unable to move." "I'm not most wolves," Elara said, testing the words on her tongue. They felt foreign but not entirely wrong. "No," Astrid agreed with a slight smile. "Most wolves don't pin my brother in front of his entire pack on their first day." That was impressive. Also stupid, because Kale's ego is already insufferable. But mostly impressive. Despite her nerves, Elara laughed. "He let me win." "He tested you, and you passed," Astrid corrected. "There's a difference. Kale doesn't believe in false victories. If you'd submitted like he expected, he would have been disappointed. The fact that you fought back." She grinned, showing teeth. "That's what he's been waiting for his entire life. A mate who challenges him instead of just obeying. What if I can't be what he needs?" The question escaped before Elara could stop it. What if the strength I showed today was just temporary? What if tomorrow I wake up and I'm weak again? Astrid turned her around, gripping her shoulders with surprising gentleness. "Listen carefully, because I'm only saying this once. The strength you showed today wasn't borrowed. It wasn't temporary. It was revealed. Your false bond with that southern peacock was suppressing you, keeping you small so he could feel big. Now that it's gone, now that you're bonded to someone who actually wants you strong, this is who you've always been underneath." "How do you know?" "Because I watched my brother fall apart when his first mate died in childbirth 7 years ago," Astrid said bluntly. "I watched him close himself off, throw himself into wars and politics, swear he'd never bond again because the pain was too great. And then yesterday, he came back from scouting with your scent on his clothes and this look in his eyes, like he'd found something he didn't know he was missing. That's not manipulation, Elara. That's fate finally getting its shit together." "He had a mate before?" The words hit Elara like cold water. Kale had mentioned nothing about a previous bond, and suddenly she felt like an intruder in someone else's story. "Mira," Astrid said softly. She was complicated. Political alliance, moon-blessed mark, everything proper and correct. But the bond was never as strong as it should have been. They cared for each other, worked well together, but there was always something missing. Then she died, bringing their son into the world, and Kale buried whatever heart he had left along with her. "He has a son?" Elara's voice cracked. Why hadn't Kale mentioned this? What other secrets was she walking into? "Eric. He's 6 years old, being raised by Mira's mother in the Southern Territories because Kale couldn't bear to look at him after." Astrid stopped, seeming to realize she'd said too much. "This isn't my story to tell. Kale will explain when he's ready. I only mention it so you understand. My brother doesn't give his heart easily. The fact that he's claimed you, that the bond between you is strong enough to register before the mating ceremony is even complete, that's significant." Elara's mind reeled with this new information. A dead mate. A child hidden away. A man carrying grief that he'd buried beneath duty and war. Suddenly, Kale's fierce protectiveness, his insistence on her strength, made more sense. He wasn't trying to control her, he was trying to ensure she wouldn't break under the weight of being his queen. "I need to see him," Elara said. "Before the ceremony. I need." The groom isn't supposed to see the bride before the ceremony, Astrid said, but her expression softened. But you're not exactly following tradition anyway, so why start now? Come on. She led Elara through winding corridors carved into the mountain itself, past warriors who bowed as they passed, until they reached a chamber overlooking the northern forests. Kale stood at the window, wearing ceremonial leathers marked with the silver runes of the first Thornwood Alphas. He looked like something out of legend, powerful and dangerous and utterly untamed. I'll leave you two alone, Astrid said, squeezing Elara's hand once before disappearing back down the corridor. Kale turned as the door closed, and his expression transformed when he saw her. You're not supposed to be here, he said, but there was no reprimand in his tone. Only wonder. Why didn't you tell me about Mira? Elara asked, deciding that honesty was the only option when you were about to permanently bond your soul to someone. About your son? Kale's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he'd refuse to answer. Then he sighed, the sound carrying years of grief. Because I didn't want the past to poison the present. Because Eric is a conversation that requires time and care, not something to rush through between a rescue and a ceremony. And because Mira. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Mira deserves more than being compared to what I feel for you. What do you feel for me? Elara pressed, needing to hear it. We've known each other less than a day, Kale. This could just be the bond talking. Hormones and magic and destiny, Kale interrupted, crossing to her in 3 long strides. Yes, the bond is powerful. Yes, the physical attraction is intense. But that's not why I'm doing this, Elara. I'm doing this because when I saw you at that stream, broken and bleeding and still fighting to survive, I recognized something in you that I've spent 7 years trying to bury in myself. What? The refusal to stay down. He cupped her face in his hands, and the tenderness in the gesture made her chest ache. Mira was a good mate, a good queen, but she was born into strength. She never had to fight for it. You've been fighting your entire life just to exist. And now that the chains are off, now that you're free to be what you actually are, little wolf, you're going to be magnificent. And I want to be there to watch it happen. Tears pricked Elara's eyes. I'm terrified I'll disappoint you. Impossible, Kale said firmly. You could never be as disappointing as that preening peacock who rejected you. The bar is literally on the ground. The absurdity of the statement startled a laugh out of Elara, and she felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Did you just make a joke? I contain multitudes, Kale said with mock solemnity. Fierce warrior, wise king, mediocre comedian. You're getting the complete package. What about grieving father? The words slipped out before Elara could stop them, and she watched Kale's expression shudder. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. No, you should have, Kale interrupted quietly. If we're doing this, really doing this, then we need honesty. Even when it hurts. He moved back to the window, staring out at the darkening forest. I failed Eric. I failed Mira. When she died, I was so consumed by grief and guilt that I couldn't look at our son without seeing everything I'd lost. So I sent him away, told myself it was for his protection, that he'd be safer away from the politics and dangers of being the Alpha's heir. But the truth is, I was a coward. I couldn't face my own pain, so I made sure I wouldn't have to. You're not a coward, Elara said, moving to stand beside him. You're human. And wolf. And grieving. That doesn't make you weak. It makes me exactly what I accused Aldrich of being, Kale said bitterly. A man who runs from hard things instead of facing them. Elara thought about that, about the parallels between them. Both carrying grief and guilt. Both shaped by bonds that hadn't been quite right. Both learning, slowly, how to be strong in ways that mattered. Then we'll face the hard things together, she said finally. After the ceremony, after we announce the mating, we bring Eric home. We figure out how to be a family. We stop running. Kale's eyes widened slightly. You do that? Accept another woman's child as your own. I'd accept your child as ours, Elara corrected. If you'll accept a queen who's still learning how to be strong. The kiss he gave her was soft and desperate and full of promises neither of them knew if they could keep. But it felt real in a way Aldrich's dutiful pecks never had. It felt like the beginning of something that might actually last. We should go, Kale murmured against her lips when they finally pulled apart. The full moon is rising, and the clan is waiting. Ready to become mine in front of the gods and the pack. Ready to become each other's, Elara corrected, and took his offered hand. The ceremonial chamber was packed with wolves by the time they descended. Hundreds of them, warriors and elders, healers and craftsmen, all the people who made up the Thornwood clan. They stood in a circle around the altar, and the moonlight pouring through the opening above painted everything in silver and shadow. An ancient woman waited at the altar, her hair white as snow, her eyes clouded with cataracts, but somehow seeing more than anyone else in the room. This was Elder Mora, the last of the old seers, who'd been performing mating ceremonies since before Kale was born. "Approach," she commanded, her voice surprisingly strong for someone who looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. Elara and Kale walked forward together, still holding hands, and the assembled wolves began to howl, a sound that started low and built until it seemed like the mountain itself was singing. "Kale Thornwood," Elder Mora intoned. "Alpha of the North, wolfking of the Thornwood clan, born of the old blood and the old ways. Do you come freely to this mating?" "I do," Kale said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Elara of Grehollow," Elder Mora continued, turning her clouded eyes toward Elara with unnerving accuracy. "Survivor of bond severance, bearer of 2 marks, chosen twice by the moon goddess herself. Do you come freely to this mating?" "I do," Elara said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Then present your marks." They turned to face each other, Elara holding up her wrist where the thorned wolf gleamed silver in the moonlight, Kale placing his hand over his heart where the matching mark burned on his chest. Elder Mora shuffled forward, examining both marks with gnarled fingers. "The moon goddess has blessed this union," she declared, and the howling intensified. "These marks are true. This bond is sanctified. What the goddess has joined, let no wolf separate." The irony wasn't lost on Elara. The same words had probably been spoken at her almost wedding to Aldrich, and look how that had turned out. But Kale's hand tightened on hers, and she felt the bond pulse with certainty. "The completion requires blood," Elder Mora continued, producing a ceremonial blade made of silver and ancient bone. "A mingling of life force to seal the bond permanently. Are you prepared?" Elara's heart hammered, but she nodded. This was it, the point of no return. Once they completed this ceremony, she would be Thornwood in every way that mattered. There would be no going back to Grehollow, no reconciliation with her former life, no pretending this was all a dream. Elder Mora took Kale's hand first, drawing the blade across his palm. Blood welled, dark and rich, and he didn't flinch. Then she took Elara's hand, and the cut stung, but Elara kept her expression neutral. "Join hands," Elder Mora commanded. They pressed their bleeding palms together, and the bond exploded. It wasn't the gentle connection she'd had with Aldrich, that golden thread that hummed quietly beneath awareness. This was a fucking supernova. Power surged through their joined hands, silver fire that climbed up their arms and spread across their bodies until they were both glowing in the darkness. Elara gasped as memories that weren't hers flooded her mind. Kale, as a child, learning to fight from his father. Kale standing over Mira's grave, hollow-eyed and broken. Kale seeing Elara at the window of Blackthorn Castle and feeling something crack open in his chest. Kale finding her at the stream and knowing that the moon goddess had finally answered a prayer he'd been too afraid to speak. And in return, Kale saw her, really saw her. Every moment of inadequacy, every cutting remark from Seraphina, every lukewarm kiss from Aldrich. The slow erosion of her self-worth, the desperate hope that maybe love would grow if she just tried hard enough. And then the betrayal, the severance, the pain that had nearly destroyed her. They saw each other completely, every flaw and fear and secret shame, and the bond wrapped around all of it like silver chains, binding them together despite the mess. "The bond is sealed," Elder Mora declared, her voice triumphant. "Let the realm know that Kale Thornwood and Elara Thornwood are mated before the moon goddess and the clan. What has been joined cannot be broken. What has been blessed cannot be cursed. They are one soul in 2 bodies, now and forever." The howling reached a crescendo, and Elara felt Lunar surge forward, felt the shift begin without her conscious choice. Beside her, Kale was shifting too, and within seconds they stood on 4 legs, their wolves facing each other in the silvery moonlight. Kale's black wolf was massive and magnificent, every inch the predator he was in human form. But Elara's silver wolf, larger now than she'd ever been, shot through with storm-cloud gray, met him as an equal. They circled each other once, twice, and then Kale's wolf lunged. But this time, it wasn't a test. This was a dance, 2 predators moving in perfect synchronization, teeth and claws and power that shook the very stones beneath their paws. They fought and tumbled and bit, not to harm but to challenge, to celebrate, to claim. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Elara's wolf threw back her head and howled, a sound of triumph and defiance and absolute certainty. The Thornwood clan answered with their own howls, accepting her, claiming her as their own. And somewhere in the south, in a castle where a wedding feast had turned into a scandal, Elara imagined that Aldrich and Seraphina heard the echo of that howl and understood exactly what it meant. She was no longer the weak little wolf they'd discarded. She was the Wolf Queen of the North. And she was coming for them. 3 days later, Blackthorn Castle. Prince Aldrich stood in his father's war room, staring at the message that had arrived by Raven an hour ago. The parchment was crisp and formal, sealed with the Thornwood crest, and its contents had turned his blood to ice. To the court of Blackthorn and all the southern kingdoms. Let it be known that Kale Thornwood, Alpha of the North and Wolfking of the Thornwood clan, has taken a mate in accordance with the old laws and the blessing of the moon goddess. Elara of Greyhollow, formerly betrothed to Prince Aldrich of Blackthorn, is now Elara Thornwood, Queen of the North and Luna of the Thornwood clan. This bond was sealed under the full moon with all proper ceremonies and witnesses. The marks are true. The blessing is undeniable. Furthermore, let it be known that Prince Aldrich's breaking of his moon-blessed bond with Elara constitutes heresy under the old laws. The Thornwood clan calls for a formal inquiry into this violation and reserves the right to seek restitution for the harm done to our queen. Any kingdom that wishes to dispute this mating or question its legitimacy is welcome to present their case to the Thornwood clan in person. We await your response with great interest. Kale Thornwood, Wolfking of the North. This is a disaster, King Edmund said, his face purple with rage. He's threatening war over a woman. Over a bond that was clearly flawed if it broke so easily. The bond didn't break easily, Father, Aldrich said quietly, his hand unconsciously moving to his chest, where he'd felt the severance like a knife between his ribs. I invoked the right of severance. I chose to break it. Because she was inadequate. Seraphina interjected from where she stood beside Aldrich, no longer his mistress, but his betrothed, the wedding hastily rescheduled for next week. Everyone could see it. She was too weak to be queen, too gentle to command respect. You did what needed to be done. But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at Aldrich's gut. He'd convinced himself that Elara's weakness justified the betrayal, that choosing strength over destiny was the practical choice. But the woman described in this message, bonded to the most feared alpha in 5 kingdoms, sealed under the full moon, already bearing the title of Wolf Queen, that didn't sound weak. That sounded dangerous. What do we do? Aldrich asked his father, hating the uncertainty in his own voice. King Edmund was silent for a long moment, his strategic mind clearly working through options. Finally, he spoke. We deny everything. We claim the bond with Elara was false from the beginning, a mistake made by incompetent seers. We say Thornwood manipulated a vulnerable woman in her moment of weakness. We turn this into a story of northern aggression instead of southern betrayal. And if they push for the formal inquiry? Aldrich pressed. Then we fight, the king said grimly. We've been at war with Thornwood for 5 years anyway. This just gives us new justification. We paint Elara as a traitor who ran to our enemies. We make her the villain instead of the victim. Seraphina's eyes gleamed with calculation. I can help with that. I was her closest friend. I know all her secrets, her fears, her weaknesses. I can make the court believe she orchestrated this whole thing, that she wanted power and couldn't get it here, so she sought it in the north. The casual cruelty in her voice made even Aldrich flinch. This was the woman he'd chosen over his moon-blessed mate. This was the future he'd traded Elara for. Do it, King Edmund commanded. Spread the rumors. Control the narrative. By the time Thornwood makes his next move, public opinion will be firmly on our side. As Serafina left to begin her campaign of character assassination, Aldrich found himself alone with his father, still staring at the message. The words seemed to burn themselves into his vision. Formerly betrothed to Prince Aldrich, now Queen of the North. Did I make a mistake? The words escaped before he could stop them. His father's expression hardened. You made a choice. Now we live with the consequences. Stop second-guessing yourself and start preparing for war. But as Aldrich walked back to his chambers, past the chapel where he'd destroyed his bond with Elara, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd done something irreversible. Something that would haunt him far longer than a political scandal. He'd rejected his moon-blessed mate and broken a sacred bond. And the moon goddess, it seemed, had a very specific idea of how to exact her revenge. She'd given Elara everything Aldrich had denied her: power, respect, a mate who actually wanted her strong, and placed her in a position where she could destroy him completely. The weak little wolf he'd discarded had become a queen. And queens, he was beginning to realize, were far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Chapter 5: The Queen's Gambit. 6 weeks later, Thornwood Keep. Elara stood on the battlements watching the snow fall in thick curtains across the northern mountains, a fur cloak wrapped around her shoulders and steam rising from the mug of spiced wine in her hands. 6 weeks since the mating ceremony. 6 weeks since she'd become Elara Thornwood, and she still sometimes woke expecting to find herself back in Blackthorn, preparing for a wedding that would never happen. But then Cale would pull her close, and the bond would remind her, with devastating certainty, that this was real. That she was exactly where she was meant to be. "You're brooding again," Astrid said, appearing beside her with the uncanny stealth that all Thornwood warriors seemed to possess. "That's my brother's habit. You're supposed to be the optimistic one in this relationship." "I'm strategizing," Elara corrected, though the smile tugging at her lips betrayed her. "There's a difference. Is that what we're calling it?" Astrid leaned against the stone wall, her steel-gray eyes assessing. "Or are you obsessing over the reports from the south?" The reports. There had been many over the past weeks, brought by spies and traveling merchants, each one painting a clearer picture of the narrative Blackthorn was spinning. Elara the traitor. Elara the manipulator. Elara the weak Omega who'd run to the enemy because she couldn't handle rejection. Serafina's handiwork, undoubtedly. Her former friend knew exactly which lies would sting most, which half-truths would be most believable. She'd spent years learning Elara's vulnerabilities, after all. Now she was weaponizing them. "They're calling me the faithless wolf," Elara said quietly. "Saying I seduced Cale during the war negotiations, that I was planning to betray Aldrich all along. That the bond severance was my idea because I wanted more power than Blackthorn could offer. And you care what southern courtiers think because?" Astrid prompted. "Because those lies will reach my family," Elara said, her voice cracking slightly. "My mother, my sisters. They'll believe I'm a traitor. That everything I told them about loving Aldrich, about being honored by the moon goddess's choice, was a lie. Then we tell them the truth. We're at war with Blackthorn," Elara pointed out. "Cale's blocked all roads between our territories. Even if I could send a message, it would be intercepted and used as propaganda. Look, the traitor queen tries to contact her former kingdom, clearly plotting against the north." Astrid was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "What if you didn't send a message? What if you went yourself?" Elara nearly dropped her wine. "Are you insane? I can't just walk into Blackthorn Castle." "Not the castle," Astrid interrupted. "But Greyhollow? Your family's estate? That's technically neutral territory since your father isn't sworn directly to the king. We could arrange an escort, make it look like a diplomatic mission." Cale would never allow it. Elara shook her head. "It's too dangerous. If Aldrich found out I was there, he'd send soldiers. It would be an ambush. Which is why we wouldn't tell Cale until after you left." Elara turned to stare at her sister by mating, searching for any sign that this was a joke. But Astrid's expression was perfectly serious. You want me to sneak away from my mate, the Wolf King of the North, and travel into hostile territory without his knowledge or permission. That's your plan? Yes. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Probably, Astrid agreed cheerfully. But it's also the kind of bold move that would prove you're not some helpless Omega who needs protecting. You want to change the narrative? Show them you're strong enough to face your accusers. Show your family the truth. Show Aldrich and Serafina that you're not afraid of them anymore. The idea was reckless and dangerous and absolutely insane. It was also deeply tempting. Elara had spent 6 weeks in Thornwood Keep, training with the warriors, learning politics from the elders, becoming the queen her people needed. But she'd also been hiding, safe behind Kale's protection, shielded from the consequences of her choices. What kind of queen was she if she couldn't face her own past? Kale will be furious, Elara said, but she was already considering logistics, already planning. Kale will survive, Astrid replied. And honestly, he needs someone who challenges him. Mira never would have done something this crazy. She always played it safe, always followed the rules. You, she grinned. You're different. You're the kind of chaos my brother needs to keep him from becoming a tyrant. Before Elara could respond, a commotion erupted in the courtyard below. She leaned over the battlements to see a carriage arriving, ornate and expensive, bearing colors she didn't recognize. Definitely not Thornwood. Are we expecting visitors? Elara asked. Not that I'm aware of. Astrid's hand moved instinctively to the blade at her hip. Stay here. I'll check. But Elara was already moving toward the stairs, her wolf rising protectively. She'd spent too long being kept away from danger, hidden like a secret. If someone was arriving at her keep, she would greet them as a queen. By the time she reached the courtyard, Kale was already there, his posture radiating barely controlled aggression. The carriage door opened, and a woman emerged tall and elegant, wearing traveling clothes that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. Her hair was auburn shot through with silver, and her eyes were a startling violet. Lady Katerina of Silvermore, Kale said, his voice carefully neutral. This is unexpected. I imagine so, the woman replied, her voice carrying the cultured accent of the Eastern Kingdoms. But necessary. I come bearing news that concerns your new queen. Those violet eyes found Elara across the courtyard, and something like recognition flickered there. Elara of Greyhollow. Or should I say Elara Thornwood? The infamous faithless wolf. Elara lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed by the title. That's what they're calling me in the South. I prefer to think of myself as the woman who escaped a terrible fate. A smile curved Katerina's lips. Good. You have a spine. You'll need it for what comes next. She turned back to Kale. May we speak somewhere private? What I have to say concerns the political situation with Blackthorn, and it's delicate. Kale's eyes narrowed, but he gestured toward the keep. Follow me. They assembled in Kale's war room, Elara, Kale, Astrid, and Lady Katerina, with Elder Mora wheeled in to provide counsel. Maps of the 5 kingdoms covered the table, marked with troop positions and supply routes. The reality of impending war laid bare in ink and parchment. Speak, Kale commanded once everyone was settled. What news from the east? Katerina took her time, clearly savoring the drama. King Edmund is mobilizing his forces. He's calling in favors from allied kingdoms, painting Thornwood as aggressors who stole his son's betrothed through dark magic and manipulation. By spring, he'll have enough soldiers to march on your borders. We expected as much, Kale said, though his jaw tightened. Is that why you traveled through winter storms? To tell us what we already knew? No. Katerina's eyes glittered. I came to tell you that Edmund is making a critical mistake. He's so focused on the military threat that he's ignoring the legal one. Legal? Elara leaned forward. What do you mean? The old laws still hold weight, even if kingdoms pretend otherwise, Katerina explained. Aldrich broke a moon-blessed bond. That's heresy. Under ancient law, any kingdom can call for a trial of 3, a formal challenge where both parties present their case before neutral judges. The verdict is binding, enforced by all kingdoms regardless of alliances. Kale's eyes lit with predatory interest. And if we win this trial? Then Aldrich would be found guilty of heresy. He'd be forced to abdicate his claim to the throne, and Blackthorn would owe Thornwood restitution, territory, gold, or other compensation as the judges see fit. It would cripple them politically without spilling a drop of blood. And if we lose? Elara asked, though she already suspected the answer. Then you'd be declared a false queen, your bond to Chaol would be questioned, and Thornwood would lose any legal justification for challenging Blackthorn's actions. You'd be seen as a traitor across all 5 kingdoms. Katarina's expression softened slightly. But you won't lose. I've read the law, examined the precedents. Aldrich violated sacred vows. The moon goddess blessed your first bond, then blessed your second when the first was broken. That's not manipulation, that's divine judgment. Elara felt hope kindle in her chest for the first time in weeks. A trial meant she could face her accusers, tell her truth, force the realm to actually listen instead of believing Seraphina's lies. How do we initiate this trial? That's the complicated part, Katarina admitted. The challenge must be issued at the Winter Conclave, a gathering of all 5 kingdoms that happens once a decade. It's in 3 weeks, hosted in neutral territory at Moonstone Summit. Both parties must attend and agree to the trial, or it can't proceed. Aldrich will never agree, Chaol said flatly. He'd have to publicly admit to breaking the bond, and he's spent weeks denying it happened. He will if you make him an offer he can't refuse, Katarina replied with a sly smile. Challenge him to personal combat as an alternative. Alpha against alpha, winner takes all. He's arrogant enough to believe he could beat you in a fight, and proud enough that refusing would make him look weak. Chaol was shaking his head before she finished. I'm not risking everything on a trial that could go either way based on political maneuvering. I'll testify, Elara interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. I'll stand before the 5 kingdoms and tell them exactly what happened. What Aldrich and Seraphina did. How the bond was broken. Everything. Elara, no. Chaol's hand closed over hers, his eyes fierce. You'd be walking into a room full of people who already believe you're a traitor. They'd tear you apart. Let them try, Elara said, feeling Lunar stir with agreement. I'm done hiding. I'm done letting other people control the narrative about my life. If there's a chance to prove the truth, to force them to actually see what was done to me, then I have to take it. She's right, Elder Mora spoke for the first time, her clouded eyes somehow focused directly on Chaol. The moon goddess doesn't give second chances without purpose. This trial, it's not about politics or territory. It's about justice. About showing the realm what happens when you spit on sacred bonds. Chaol looked between Elara and the Elder, clearly torn between protecting his mate and trusting her to fight her own battles. Finally, he sighed. If we do this, we do it properly. Full escort, maximum security, and you don't leave my sight for a second. Deal, Elara said, relief flooding through her. Then, because she was apparently committed to honesty now, although I might need to leave your sight briefly before the conclave. There's something I need to do first. Suspicion flickered across Chaol's face. What something? I need to visit Grey Hollow. See my family. Give them my side of the story before the trial. She held up a hand as he started to protest. I know it's dangerous. I know you'll hate it. But they deserve to hear the truth from me, not from rumors and propaganda. They deserve to know I'm not the traitor everyone claims. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Absolutely not, Chaol said finally, his voice carrying alpha command. It's too dangerous. Aldrich would hear about it within hours, and you'd be ambushed before you reached the estate. I won't risk you for my family? Elara interrupted, pulling her hand from his. For the people who raised me, who believed in me, who are probably crying themselves to sleep thinking I betrayed everything they taught me about honor and duty. You won't risk me for them. I won't risk you for a suicide mission dressed up as closure, Chaol shot back. You want to tell your family the truth? Fine. We'll send a heavily guarded messenger. We'll arrange a meeting on neutral ground. But you are not walking into Blackthorn territory just to prove a point. It's not about proving a point. Elara's voice rose, her wolf pushing forward with frustration. It's about being brave enough to face the consequences of my choices. You want me to be a strong queen? Then let me be strong. Let me take a risk. Let me show everyone, including you, that I'm not fragile goods that need constant protecting. You've been queen for 6 weeks. Kale roared, his own wolf rising to meet hers. 6 weeks, Elara. You've barely learned our customs, barely started training, and you want to rush headlong into enemy territory like you're invincible? That's not strength, that's recklessness. The words hit like a slap. All the insecurity she'd been trying to bury came roaring back. You're not ready. You're not enough. You're still the weak little wolf who couldn't keep her first mate. Maybe I am reckless, Elara said quietly, standing from the table. Maybe I'm making a mistake. But at least I'm doing something instead of hiding behind walls and waiting for others to solve my problems. At least I'm trying to be the queen you keep saying you want me to be. She walked out before anyone could respond, her vision blurred with angry tears. She made it to their chambers, slammed the door, and collapsed against it, her wolf howling with frustration and hurt. The bond thrummed with Kale's emotions, anger, fear, frustration, and underneath it all, a desperate, primal need to keep her safe that bordered on obsessive. She understood it intellectually. He'd lost Mira to childbirth, had spent years burying his grief, and now had a new mate who wanted to walk directly into danger. Of course, he was terrified. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. Didn't make her feel less trapped. She must have dozed off against the door, because she woke to Kale lifting her gently and carrying her to the bed. The room was dark now, lit only by dying embers in the fireplace. I'm sorry, he said quietly, settling beside her. I shouldn't have shouted. Shouldn't have dismissed your concerns about your family. I'm sorry too, Elara replied, curling into his warmth despite her lingering anger. I know you're scared. I know this is difficult for you after Mira. Kale was silent for a long moment, his arms tightening around her. She died in this bed, he said finally, his voice rough. Giving birth to Eric. The healers tried everything, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. I watched her fade for 3 days, helpless to do anything except hold her hand and lie about how everything would be fine. He pressed his face into Elara's hair. I can't watch you die too. I can't survive losing another mate. So yes, I'm overprotective. Yes, I'm paranoid. But it's only because the thought of existing in a world without you makes me want to burn everything down. The raw honesty cracked something open in Elara's chest. She turned in his arms, cupping his face in her hands. I'm not Mira. And what I'm proposing isn't childbirth, it's a calculated risk with precautions. But Kale, if you keep me locked away, if you never let me take chances or fight my own battles, you'll lose me anyway. Not to death, but to resentment. To the slow suffocation of being treated like a possession instead of a partner. Kale closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they shone with unshed tears. What do you need from me? Trust, Elara said simply. Trust that I'm strong enough to face my past. Trust that I won't take unnecessary risks. Trust that the moon goddess didn't give us this bond just to watch it fail because you were too afraid to let me live. And if something happens to you, then you burn everything down like you said, Elara replied with a slight smile. But you let me try first. Deal? Kale pulled her close, and she felt him shaking with fear, with grief, with the effort of letting go. Deal, he finally whispered. But we do it my way. Full escort, emergency signals, and you take Astrid with you. She's the best warrior I have, and she won't let anything happen to you. Thank you, Elara breathed, feeling the tension finally drain from her body. They lay tangled together in the darkness, the bond humming between them with renewed understanding. They'd had their first real fight as mates and survived it. That had to count for something. The trial, Kale said eventually. You're sure you want to do this? Stand before the 5 kingdoms and relive the worst day of your life. I'm sure, Elara replied. Because the alternative is letting them win. Letting Aldrich and Serafina rewrite history to make themselves the heroes and me the villain. I can't live with that. Then we fight, Kale said, his voice taking on that decisive alpha quality she was learning to recognize. We go to the winter conclave. We force the trial. We make them face what they did to you. And when we win, because we will win, we take everything they tried to steal from you and make it ours instead. Everything? Elara asked, a dangerous idea forming in her mind. Everything, Kale confirmed. What are you thinking? That if Aldrich is forced to abdicate for breaking the bond, someone else would need to take the throne of Blackthorn, Elara said slowly. Someone with a legitimate claim. Someone who could unite the kingdoms instead of keeping them at war. Cale's eyes widened as he understood what she was suggesting. You want to claim Blackthorn for yourself? Not for myself, Elara corrected. For us. For Thornwood. Think about it, if we control both territories, we could end this war permanently. We could rewrite the power structure of all 5 kingdoms. We could build an empire, Cale finished, something like awe in his voice. You want to turn a trial about a broken bond into a complete political restructuring. Why not? Elara asked, feeling power and possibility surge through her veins. They wanted to destroy me. Instead, I'll take everything they have and use it to build something better. That's not weakness. That's not hiding. That's revenge wrapped in strategy, wrapped in justice. Cale laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that transformed his entire face. There's my savage queen, he said, pulling her into a kiss that tasted like promise and danger and the future they would forge together. This is why the moon goddess chose you. Not in spite of your gentleness, but because underneath it, you're absolutely ruthless when you need to be. I learned from the best, Elara replied against his lips. Now, are you going to keep arguing with me, or are we going to start planning how to steal a kingdom? Both, Cale decided, rolling her beneath him with a predatory grin. But first, I'm going to remind you exactly why you chose this bond over the one you lost. As his mouth found her throat, as the bond sang between them with renewed heat and purpose, Elara felt something settle into place inside her chest. She wasn't the weak little wolf of Grey Hollow anymore. She wasn't even just the wolf queen of the north. She was Elara Thornwood, survivor, strategist, and future architect of an empire built on the ashes of betrayal. And in 3 weeks, at the Winter Conclave, the realm would finally understand exactly what they'd created when they broke her heart. They'd created something far more dangerous than a rejected bride seeking comfort. They'd created a queen with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. May the moon goddess have mercy on them all. Because Elara certainly wouldn't. 2 weeks later, the journey to Grey Hollow. The small party moved through the snow-covered forest like shadows, 5 riders dressed in nondescript traveling clothes that gave no hint of their true identities. Elara rode in the center, flanked by Astrid on one side and 3 of Cale's most trusted warriors on the other. They'd left Thornwood Keep before dawn, using forgotten paths that only smugglers and wolves knew, and they'd been riding for 2 days straight. Another day, maybe 2, and they'd reach Grey Hollow if they weren't discovered first. Cale had been against this plan until the very end, extracting promise after promise from Elara about safety protocols and emergency signals. He'd kissed her like he might never see her again, and she'd felt his fear bleeding through the bond like a physical wound. But he'd let her go. That was what mattered. You're thinking about him, Astrid observed, her breath misting in the cold air. The bond must be going wild with him so far away. It's manageable, Elara lied. In truth, the distance felt like a constant ache, the bond stretching thin and uncomfortable across the miles. But she could bear it. She'd borne worse. We should reach the border by nightfall, one of the warriors, Marcus, reported. After that, we'll be in Blackthorn territory. Higher risk of patrols. Can we avoid them? Elara asked. We can try, Marcus said carefully. But your majesty needs to understand, if we're discovered, if they realize who you are, we won't be able to fight our way out. We're too outnumbered. We'd need to run. Then we won't be discovered, Elara said with more confidence than she felt. They rode in silence for another hour, the only sounds the crunch of snow beneath hooves and the whisper of wind through bare branches. Elara found herself thinking about her family, her mother with her practical ways and high expectations, her younger sister Lina who'd always looked up to her, her father who'd been so proud when the mark appeared matching Aldrich's. What would they think of her now? Would they understand? Would they forgive her for running instead of fighting? Would they believe her truth, or had Seraphina's poison already done its work? Riders ahead, Astrid hissed suddenly, her hand moving to her blade. They all froze, listening. Sure enough, the sound of horses approached from the south, multiple animals, moving fast. Into the trees, Marcus ordered, and they quickly dismounted, leading their horses into the thick underbrush and praying the snow would cover their tracks quickly enough. Elara held her breath as the patrol passed, 10 soldiers bearing blackthorn colors, riding with the kind of urgency that suggested they were searching for something. Or someone. Do you think they know? Elara whispered once the patrol was out of earshot. Unlikely, Astrid replied. More likely they're just increasing border security before the winter conclave. Edmund wouldn't want Thornwood's spies gathering intelligence. They waited another 10 minutes before emerging from hiding, and Elara noticed that Marcus was frowning at something in the snow. What is it? She asked. Tracks, he said slowly. Multiple sets, moving east. Recent, within the last hour. More patrols. Possibly. Marcus's expression was troubled. Or merchants. Or refugees fleeing the war. Hard to say without following them. We don't have time for detours, Astrid said firmly. We need to reach Grey Hollow before. She cut off as an arrow whistled out of the trees, catching one of the warriors, Thomas, in the shoulder and sending him tumbling from his horse with a cry of pain. Ambush! Marcus roared, drawing his sword as more arrows flew. Chaos erupted. Figures emerged from the forest on all sides, at least 20 of them, wearing mismatched armor but moving with the coordination of trained soldiers. Not a random bandit attack. This was planned. Protect the queen. Astrid shouted, her sword already singing as she cut down the first attacker. But they were hopelessly outnumbered, and more soldiers were emerging from the trees with every passing second. Elara's wolf surged forward, demanding to be released, and she didn't fight it. The shift came faster now, smoother, and within seconds her silver wolf stood in the snow, lips pulled back in a snarl. The attackers hesitated. Clearly they'd expected a helpless human, not a wolf the size of a small horse radiating alpha power. But the hesitation didn't last long. They came at her from all sides, blades flashing, and Elara fought with a ferocity she hadn't known she possessed. She felt Lunar guiding her, teaching her, showing her how to be the predator she'd always been meant to be. She tore out throats and shattered bones, felt blood hot on her muzzle, heard screams that would haunt her dreams later. This was nothing like the playful dominance fights in Thornwood Keep. This was survival, raw and brutal. But there were too many. For every soldier she killed, 2 more appeared. She felt claws raking across her flank, felt a blade slice into her shoulder, and still she fought because stopping meant death, and death meant Kale would never forgive himself for letting her go. Then, through the chaos and blood, she heard a voice that made her blood freeze. Take her alive. The prince wants her breathing. The accent was Blackthorn. This wasn't a random attack. This was an organized capture. Aldrich knew she was here. Somehow, impossibly, he knew. Elara tried to run, tried to reach the horses and flee, but something hit her from behind, a net, weighted and treated with wolfsbane. The pain was immediate and excruciating, her shift reversing involuntarily, leaving her human and naked and tangled in silver-laced rope. No! Astrid's scream cut through the battle, but she was pinned down by 3 soldiers, unable to reach her queen. Elara fought the net like a feral thing, her skin burning where the wolfsbane touched, but rough hands grabbed her, held her down, and she felt the sharp prick of a needle in her neck. Sedative. Spreading warmth through her veins, making her limbs heavy. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Astrid's anguished face, and the last thing she felt was the bond stretching across the miles, and Kale's absolute terror flooding through it as he realized something was terribly, terribly wrong. I'm sorry, she thought as consciousness faded. I'm so sorry. Then there was nothing but darkness and the distant echo of her mate's howl of rage. The faithless wolf had been captured, and the realm would burn for it. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. Blackthorn Castle, The Dungeons. Elara woke to cold stone against her cheek and the acrid taste of wolfsbane in her mouth. Her head pounded with the aftereffects of whatever sedative they'd used, and every muscle in her body screamed protest as she tried to sit up. She was in a cell, small, dark, with silver-lined bars that made her wolf recoil instinctively. They'd dressed her in a rough prison shift, and iron manacles circled her wrists, heavy and humiliating. The bond with Cale was a living wound in her chest, stretched so thin across the distance that she could barely feel him through the pain. But she could sense his fury, his fear, his absolute determination to find her. The knowledge that he was coming, that he would tear the realm apart to reach her, was the only thing keeping her from complete despair. "You're awake. Good." Elara's head snapped up to find Serafina standing outside the cell, looking immaculate in a gown of deep green velvet, a crown of silver leaves resting on her copper hair. She'd already married Aldrich then. Already claimed the title that should have been Elara's. "Sarah," Elara croaked, her throat raw. "Or should I say, Your Highness?" "You can say whatever you like," Serafina replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're in no position to offend anyone now, are you?" Elara pushed herself to sitting, refusing to cower despite her circumstances. "What do you want? To gloat? To see the faithless wolf brought low? Actually, I came to offer you a choice." Serafina produced a key from her bodice, dangling it from her fingers. "Aldrich doesn't know I'm here. He thinks you're too dangerous to approach without guards. But I know better. You're not dangerous, Elara. You never were. You're just a scared little girl playing at being queen." The casual cruelty in her voice was so familiar it hurt. This was the friend who'd braided her hair before balls, who'd shared secrets and dreams and promises of eternal loyalty. The friend who'd destroyed her without a second thought. "What choice?" Elara asked, keeping her voice steady. "Renounce your bond with Thornwood," Serafina said simply. "Publicly declare that he forced you, manipulated you, that the bond was formed under duress. Do that, and I'll convince Aldrich to show mercy. You can go home to Grey Hollow, live quietly, maybe marry some minor lord who doesn't know your history. You can have a life, Elara. Not a great one, but a life nonetheless. And if I refuse?" Serafina's smile turned sharp. "Then you stand trial at the winter conclave as planned. But not for heresy against Aldrich, for treason against Blackthorn. We have witnesses who'll swear you were plotting with Thornwood long before the wedding. We have letters forged, but convincing, showing you conspiring to betray your kingdom. We have everything we need to paint you as a traitor who deserves execution." Elara's mind raced. This was why they'd captured her, not to kill her outright, but to force her into a position where she'd have to choose between her bond and her life. Between Cale and survival. "You went to a lot of trouble for this," Elara said slowly. "The ambush was well planned. You must have had spies watching the borders, waiting for any sign I'd leave Thornwood. How long have you been planning this?" "Since the mating announcement," Serafina admitted, clearly proud of her scheming. "I knew you'd eventually try to contact your family. You're too sentimental, too weak to leave loose ends. So we waited, and you walked right into the trap." "Cale will come for me," Elara said with absolute certainty. "He'll bring his entire army. He'll burn Blackthorn to ash before he lets you execute me. Which is why we need you to renounce the bond," Serafina said patiently, as if explaining something to a child. "If you publicly reject Thornwood, if you claim the bond was false, then he has no legal justification for war. The other kingdoms won't support him. He'll be isolated, and you'll be free. Everyone wins. Except I'll have betrayed my mate and destroyed my own honor in the process," Elara pointed out. "Not exactly a winning proposition from where I'm sitting." Serafina's expression hardened. "You don't have the luxury of honor anymore, Elara. You're a prisoner accused of treason. Your only choice is which story you want to tell, the one where you're a victim who was manipulated, or the one where you're a traitor who deserves the gallows. Choose wisely." She turned to leave, and Elara called after her, "Why do you hate me so much?" Serafina paused, something flickering across her face, surprise, maybe, or an old wound reopening. "I don't hate you," she said quietly. "I pity you. You were given everything, the mark, the prince, the destiny, and you were too weak to keep it. I did what needed to be done. I took what I deserved. And now I'm giving you a chance to accept reality and move on." "Reality," Elara repeated, pushing herself to her feet despite the dizziness. "You want to know what reality is, Sarah? Reality is that you stole a bond that was already dying because Aldrich is too much of a coward to love anyone but himself. Reality is that you'll spend your entire reign knowing your second choice, the woman he settled for because his true mate escaped. Reality is that in 3 days, when the winter conclave begins, the entire realm will learn exactly what you are, a thief wearing a stolen crown. For just a moment, one beautiful, satisfying moment, pure rage twisted Seraphina's features into something ugly. Then she controlled herself, smoothing her expression back into aristocratic disdain. 3 days, she agreed. Enjoy your cell, Elara. I'll expect your answer before the trial begins. She left in a rustle of expensive fabric, and Elara collapsed back against the wall, her brief surge of defiance fading into exhaustion and pain. The bond pulsed weakly in her chest, Kale, reaching for her across the miles, desperate and furious and completely helpless. She sent back everything she could. I'm alive. I'm fighting. Don't do anything stupid. She felt his response like a growl through her bones. I'm coming. Hold on. Elara closed her eyes and prayed to the moon goddess that he'd arrive in time. Thornwood Keep, 2 days later. Kale stood in his war room, staring at the map of Blackthorn Castle with eyes that hadn't slept in 48 hours. Every instinct screamed at him to ride south immediately, to tear the castle apart stone by stone until he found his mate. But strategy and alpha authority warred with mate bond desperation. The winter conclave begins tomorrow, Astrid said quietly. She'd returned half-dead from the ambush, bearing wounds that would scar and guilt that would last forever. We could demand her release as part of the trial. They'll execute her before we get that far, Kale interrupted, his voice rough. Edmund isn't stupid. He knows I'll come for her. This is a trap designed to lure Thornwood forces into hostile territory where they can be picked off. Then what do we do? Astrid pressed. We can't just leave her there. We don't. Kale's hands flattened on the table, claws extending to gouge the wood. We play their game, but we change the rules. Elder Mora. The ancient seer wheeled forward, her clouded eyes somehow fixed on Kale with unnerving accuracy. You want to invoke the blood right? Yes. Astrid's eyes widened. That's insane. The blood right hasn't been invoked in 2 centuries. Most kingdoms don't even recognize it anymore. But the old laws do, Kale interrupted. And the winter conclave operates under the old laws. If I invoke the blood right, Aldrich has to answer. Alpha against alpha, winner claims everything, territory, mate, crown. All of it. He'll refuse, Astrid said. He's not stupid enough to fight you in single combat. Then he's branded a coward in front of the 5 kingdoms, Kale replied. His authority crumbles. Edmund can't protect him from the loss of honor. And if he accepts, a savage smile curved his lips. Then I get to rip his throat out legally and take back what's mine. Elder Mora was quiet for a long moment, then spoke in her reedy voice. The moon goddess has shown me visions of what comes next. Blood on snow. A queen rising. An empire born from ashes. Whether you invoke the blood right or not, the outcome is already written. You've always been destined for this confrontation, Kale Thornwood. The question is whether you have the courage to see it through. I'd walk through the fires of hell for her, Kale said simply. One spoiled prince is nothing compared to that. Then we ride for Moonstone Summit, Astrid said, moving to gather weapons. We arrive at the conclave with every warrior we can spare, we invoke the blood right, and we get our queen back. And if it goes wrong, one of the advisors asked nervously. If Aldrich somehow wins. He won't, Kale said with absolute certainty. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. She gave me Elara for a reason. And I'm going to prove to the entire realm that breaking her bond was the worst mistake Aldrich ever made. Moonstone Summit, the Winter Conclave. The neutral territory of Moonstone Summit sat at the convergence of all 5 kingdoms, a valley carved by ancient magic and maintained by treaties older than memory. Massive pavilions had been erected to house the delegations, and the air thrummed with political tension thick enough to choke on. Elara was brought from Blackthorn Castle under heavy guard, still wearing the prison shift, her wrists still manacled. They'd kept her drugged with wolfsbane tea for the journey, keeping her wolf suppressed and her strength minimal. She looked like exactly what Seraphina wanted, a broken, defeated prisoner. But inside, Lunar was still fighting. still waiting for the moment to strike. They placed her in a holding area near the trial pavilion, not quite a cell, but definitely not freedom. Through the canvas walls, she could hear the assembled nobility arriving, the rumble of voices, the clatter of armor, the whispered speculation about the faithless wolf and her northern mate. She could feel Cale through the bond now, close, so close her heart ached with it. He was here. He'd come for her just like he promised. "Hold on, little wolf," his voice whispered through the bond. "I'm going to end this." The trial was called at midday, and Elara was dragged before the assembled kingdoms like a criminal. The pavilion was enormous, capable of holding thousands, and it seemed like every noble in the realm had come to witness this spectacle. 5 thrones sat on the raised dais, one for each kingdom. King Edmund of Blackthorn sat in the center, flanked by his fellow monarchs, Queen Isolde of Silvermoor, King Matthias of Ironhold, King Darien of Stormwatch, and, notably, an empty throne for Thornwood. Prince Aldrich stood at his father's right hand, looking every inch the wounded party, with Seraphina beside him wearing her crown and expression of carefully constructed sympathy. And there, entering from the opposite side of the pavilion, came Cale. He looked magnificent and absolutely terrifying. Full battle armor, the Thornwood colors on display, his claymore strapped across his back. His warriors flanked him, a show of force that made the other delegations shift nervously. But his eyes were only for Elara. The bond sang between them, recognition, relief, fury, love, and she watched his expression darken as he took in her condition. The bruises, the manacles, the deliberate humiliation of her presentation. "This trial is called to order," the High Arbiter announced, an ancient man whose job was to maintain neutrality during such proceedings. "Prince Aldrich of Blackthorn stands accused of heresy, the breaking of a moon-blessed bond." "How do you plead?" "Not guilty," Aldrich said smoothly. The bond with Elara of Greyhollow was flawed from the beginning. A mistake made by incompetent seers. "I invoked the right of severance, as was my legal right under the old laws." "Liar." Cale's voice cut through the pavilion like a blade. "The bond was blessed by the moon goddess herself. You broke it not because it was flawed, but because you were too weak to honor it." Strong words from a northern savage who kidnapped a vulnerable woman, Aldrich shot back. "You manipulated Elara in her moment of weakness, forced a bond through dark magic and coercion." "I didn't force anything." Elara's voice rang out, surprising everyone, including herself. "Cale found me after you destroyed me. After you and Seraphina betrayed me in the worst way possible. The bond that formed between us was the moon goddess correcting your mistake, giving me the mate I was always meant to have." "Silence," King Edmund roared. "The prisoner will speak only when addressed." "She's not a prisoner," Cale interrupted, his voice carrying alpha command that made several nobles flinch. "She's a queen. My queen. And I'm invoking the blood right on her behalf." The pavilion erupted into chaos. "The blood right hasn't been used in 2 centuries. Queen Isolde protested. "It's barbaric," King Matthias added. But the High Arbiter was already consulting his ancient texts, and when he looked up, his expression was grave. "The blood right is still valid under the old laws that govern this conclave. If Alpha Thornwood wishes to invoke it, Prince Aldrich must answer or forfeit his claim." All eyes turned to Aldrich, who'd gone pale. "This is ridiculous." "I'm not going to." "Fight me," Cale interrupted, his eyes blazing gold. "Alpha against alpha. If you win, you keep everything, your crown, your new bride, your story about Elara being a traitor. But if I win, I take it all. Blackthorn territory becomes part of Thornwood. Elara is vindicated and freed. And you abdicate your claim to the throne for breaking a sacred bond." "That's insane," Seraphina hissed. "You can't possibly." "Can't what?" Cale's attention shifted to her, and his smile was absolutely predatory. "Can't challenge the prince you stole? Can't demand justice for the woman you betrayed? Can't expose you both for the ambitious cowards you are?" "Aldrich, don't," King Edmund warned. "This is clearly a trap." But Aldrich's pride had been pricked, and Elara could see the calculation in his eyes. He thought he could win. Thought his formal training and royal breeding would overcome Cale's savage northern ways. He was wrong, but he didn't know it yet. I accept, Aldrich declared, drawing his sword. Let the blood right be invoked. May the moon goddess judge between us. The High Arbiter looked troubled but nodded. Then let the challenge commence. The fight continues until one party yields, dies, or is rendered unable to continue. The winner's claim is absolute and binding. May the goddess grant victory to the righteous. They cleared the center of the pavilion, creating a large circle marked with silver dust. Cale removed his armor methodically, stripping down to leather breeches and boots, his scarred chest on full display. Aldrich kept his formal armor on lighter, more ceremonial than practical, but still offering protection. Elara was brought to the edge of the circle, forced to watch, and she felt Cale's eyes on her one last time before the fight began. I love you, he sent through the bond. Whatever happens, know that. You're not allowed to die, she sent back fiercely. I didn't become a queen just to be a widow. Now go kill him, and let's steal his kingdom. She felt his savage amusement through the bond, and then the High Arbiter dropped his hand and the fight began. Aldrich struck first, a graceful lunge that would have worked in a formal duel. Cale simply sidestepped, let the blade whistle past his ribs, and smashed his fist into Aldrich's kidney hard enough to make the prince stagger. That's for breaking her bond, Cale growled. Aldrich recovered, attacking with more aggression now, and for a few minutes they traded blows that would have killed lesser men. But it was clear to everyone watching that this wasn't a fair fight. Aldrich had trained in controlled conditions against courteous opponents. Cale had survived wars and assassination attempts and battles where losing meant death. Cale was toying with him. A slash across Aldrich's arm. That's for making her think she was weak. A punch that shattered Aldrich's nose. That's for letting that copper-haired snake poison her mind. A kick that sent Aldrich sprawling. That's for every tear she cried because of you. Blood painted the silver circle red, and Aldrich was gasping now, his formal armor dented and useless, his sword arm shaking with exhaustion. But Cale wasn't even breathing hard. This wasn't a fight, it was an execution dressed up as justice. Yield, Cale commanded, standing over Aldrich with cold fury. Admit what you did. Confess to breaking the bond. Acknowledge that Elara was never the weak one you were. Never, Aldrich spat blood. I did what needed. Cale's hand shot out, gripping Aldrich's throat and lifting him off the ground. Wrong answer. Stop. Serafina screamed, running toward the circle. You're killing him. This isn't justice, it's murder. It's consequence, Elara said quietly, surprised by the coldness in her own voice. He broke a sacred bond. He destroyed an innocent woman's life. He deserves everything he's getting. Cale looked at Elara across the circle, a silent question in his eyes. How far do I go? And Elara realized she had a choice. She could ask for mercy, could let Aldrich live with his shame and defeat. Could prove she was still the gentle, forgiving woman everyone had always believed her to be. Or she could embrace the darkness that had been growing inside her since the betrayal. Could become the ruthless queen this realm needed. Make it hurt, she sent through the bond. But let him live. Death is too easy. I want him to watch everything he destroyed flourish under our rule. Cale's smile was savage and approving. He dropped Aldrich into the bloody snow, then reached down and literally tore the crown from his head, the circlet of silver and sapphires that marked him as heir to Blackthorn. The blood right is satisfied, Cale declared, his voice carrying across the assembled kingdoms. Prince Aldrich has been defeated. By the old laws, I claim victory and all that comes with it. He turned to the High Arbiter, still holding the crown. Blackthorn territory is now under Thornwood control. Aldrich is stripped of his title and his claim to the throne. And Elara Thornwood is vindicated of all charges, traitor, faithless, or otherwise. The only crime committed here was against her, and justice has been served. The High Arbiter looked at the other monarchs, who were all too shocked to protest, then nodded slowly. The old laws are clear. The blood right claim is valid. So it is witnessed, so it is binding. Guards rushed forward to collect Aldrich, who was barely conscious, his face a mask of blood and broken pride. Serafina tried to follow, but Cale stopped her with a look. You, he said quietly, and the word carried more menace than any shout. You conspired to destroy my mate. You poisoned her mind, stole her betrothed, and tried to have her executed as a traitor. Under Thornwood law, that's punishable by death." Serafina went white. "You can't." "I can," Kale interrupted. "But I won't. Because Elara asked me not to. So instead, you get to live with what you've done. You get to watch the woman you tried to destroy rule the very kingdom you thought would be yours. You get to see her thrive while you fade into obscurity. And every time you look in a mirror, you'll remember that you had a true friend, and you threw her away for a crown that was never meant to be yours." He turned his back on her, dismissing her as irrelevant, and walked to where Elara stood trembling. With gentle hands, he removed her manacles, and she collapsed against him, the strength that had been holding her upright finally giving out. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now. You're free." "We won," Elara whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "You won," Kale corrected, pulling back to look at her. "You faced your accusers. You stood strong when they tried to break you. You became exactly what I always knew you could be, a queen worth following into hell itself." The assembled nobility was still in chaos, trying to process what had just happened. Two kingdoms had just united under violent and unprecedented circumstances. The political landscape of the entire realm had shifted in the span of one bloody afternoon. And through it all, Elara felt something settle inside her chest, a certainty that had been missing since the night she'd found Aldrich and Serafina in the chapel. She was exactly where she was meant to be. "What happens now?" she asked Kale. "Now." His smile was fierce and proud and full of promises. "Now we go home, to Thornwood, to Blackthorn, to our empire. We bring Eric back where he belongs. We rule together the way the moon goddess always intended. And we show the realm what happens when you try to destroy something blessed by the divine." "Revenge and empire building," Elara said with a slight smile. "Is that your idea of happily ever after?" "That's my idea of justice," Kale corrected. "But yes, there will also be happiness. And love. And probably more chaos than either of us expects, because you're apparently addicted to taking insane risks that nearly give me heart attacks." "Someone has to keep you on your toes," Elara replied, and kissed him there in front of the assembled kingdoms, claiming her mate and her victory and her future all at once. When they finally pulled apart, the High Arbiter was clearing his throat meaningfully. "There is one more matter to address. With Aldrich stripped of his title, Blackthorn needs a new heir. The law states that the victor of a blood-right claim may install a ruler of their choosing from the defeated kingdom's bloodline." Kale and Elara exchanged glances, the same thought occurring to both simultaneously. "Elara was betrothed to Aldrich," Kale said slowly. "She has a legitimate claim through the broken bond. And her family line, Grey Hollow, has ancient ties to Blackthorn nobility. You want me to rule Blackthorn?" Elara asked, her mind reeling. "I want us to rule together," Kale corrected. "One kingdom, two thrones, shared power. We end this war permanently by uniting what was divided. We rebuild what they tried to destroy." He turned to the assembled nobility. "I present to you Elara Thornwood, Queen of the North and by blood right claim, Queen of Blackthorn. Any who oppose this claim may challenge it now." Silence. Shocked, uncertain silence. But no one challenged. How could they? The old laws had been followed to the letter. The blood right was absolute. And more importantly, no one wanted to face Kale Thornwood in combat after watching what he'd done to Aldrich. "Then it's decided," the High Arbiter declared, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "Let it be recorded that on this day, the kingdoms of Thornwood and Blackthorn were united under joint rule. May the moon goddess grant wisdom to our new monarchs." The assembled crowd erupted, some in cheers, some in protest, all in chaos. But Elara barely heard it. She was too busy processing the fact that she'd gone from prisoner to queen of two kingdoms in the span of an afternoon. "I don't know how to rule a kingdom," she whispered to Kale. "Neither did I when I started," he replied. "But we'll learn together. That's what mates do." Epilogue, 6 months later. The throne room of what was now called the Twin Kingdoms was a marvel of architectural compromise, combining Thornwood's rough-hewn stone with Blackthorn's elegant arches, northern firs with southern silks, savage pragmatism with refined beauty. It was like everything else about their rule, imperfect and magnificent in equal measure. Elara sat on one of the two thrones positioned side by side, reviewing petitions with the kind of focused attention that had become her trademark. She wore a gown that mixed northern leather with southern silk, and two crowns sat on a table nearby, one of black iron and wolf bones, one of silver and sapphires. She'd wear them both for the formal audience later, but for now, comfort trumped ceremony. "Mama." A small voice interrupted her concentration, and she looked up to see Eric, Kale's son, now officially their son, running toward her with the kind of enthusiasm only 6-year-olds possessed. "Mama, come see. The new wolf pups are opening their eyes." Elara's heart clenched at the title he'd started using 3 months ago, when he'd finally accepted that she wasn't trying to replace his birth mother, but rather add to his family. "I'll be there soon, little one." "Is your father with them?" "He's teaching them to hunt," Eric said with obvious pride. "He says I can help when I'm older." "He would," Elara muttered, but she was smiling. Kale had thrown himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else, and watching him with Eric had healed something in both of them. She finished the last petition, a dispute over grazing rights that she mentally filed under delegate to the local lords, and stood, intending to join her family at the kennels. But Astrid appeared in the doorway, her expression troubled. "We have visitors. From Silvermoor." Queen Isolde herself. Elara's instincts prickled. Isolde had been one of the few monarchs to openly support their claim after the blood right, but she wasn't the type to make social calls without purpose. What does she want? To discuss an alliance, apparently. Something about trouble brewing in the Eastern Territories. Astrid paused. "She also asked specifically to speak with you, not Kale. Said it was a matter that required a woman's perspective." Intrigued despite herself, Elara straightened her gown and reached for her crowns. "Tell her I'll receive her in the small council chamber. And find Kale, he should be present for any alliance discussions." 20 minutes later, Elara sat across from Queen Isolde, an elegant woman in her 50s with silver-shot auburn hair and those distinctive violet eyes. They'd only met briefly at the winter conclave, but Isolde had a reputation as a shrewd political operator who'd kept Silvermoor independent and prosperous through careful diplomacy. "Thank you for seeing me," Isolde said once they were settled with wine and privacy. "I know you're busy with the integration of the kingdoms." "It's been educational," Elara said diplomatically. In truth, merging two formerly hostile territories had been a logistical nightmare involving land disputes, merchant guilds, and nobles who wanted to maintain old grudges. But they were making progress. Slowly. "I imagine so. Which brings me to why I'm here." Isolde leaned forward, her expression serious. "I want to form an alliance with the Twin Kingdoms. A formal one, backed by trade agreements, mutual defense, and..." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "And marriage ties, eventually. My daughter is 15, unmarried, and could benefit from a connection to your house." Elara's mind immediately went to political strategy. An alliance with Silvermoor would give them access to eastern trade routes and support against the remaining kingdoms that still viewed their union with suspicion. "Eric is only 6, she pointed out. A betrothal contract wouldn't be viable for years." "I'm thinking long-term," Isolde said. "But more immediately, I want your help with something else." She hesitated, and for the first time, Elara saw genuine vulnerability in the older queen's face. "I need to break a bond." The words hung in the air like a blade. "Explain," Elara said quietly. "My mate, my husband, died 3 years ago," Isolde began. "But before he died, he wasn't a good man, Elara. He was cruel, controlling, and the bond made it impossible for me to leave. When he finally passed, I thought I was free. But 2 months ago, a new mark appeared on my wrist." She pushed up her sleeve to reveal a silver wolf, fresh, bright, undeniable. "The moon goddess has given me a second chance. But according to law, I can't pursue a new bond while still officially bound to my dead mate's house. I need the right of severance." Elara felt the weight of the request settle on her shoulders. This was dangerous territory. Aldrich's misuse of the right of severance was what had started this entire mess. But this was different. This was a widow trapped by law and tradition, seeking the same freedom Elara herself had found. Who knows about this? Elara asked. Only you now. And my daughter. Isolde's eyes were desperate. I'm asking you because you understand. You know what it's like to be trapped by a bond that isn't right. You found a way out, found a way to thrive. Help me do the same. Before Elara could respond, Kale entered the chamber, Eric perched on his shoulders, both of them laughing about something. They stopped when they saw the serious atmosphere, and Eric scrambled down to run to Elara. Is everything okay? Kale asked, his eyes moving between the two queens. Queen Isolde has requested an alliance, Elara said carefully. And some personal counsel. We should discuss terms. What followed was hours of negotiation, trade routes, defensive pacts, and the delicate matter of Isolde's situation. Kale was surprisingly understanding, perhaps because he'd experienced the loss of an imperfect bond himself with Mira. By the time sunset painted the sky gold and crimson, they'd hammered out the basics of an alliance that would reshape the political landscape once again. You're building something remarkable here, Isolde said as she prepared to leave. Two kingdoms united, old grievances being healed, a new generation growing up without the weight of ancient wars. The realm is watching to see if it's possible. And what do you think? Elara asked. Is it possible? Isolde's smile was knowing. I think you've already proven that impossible things happen when the moon goddess decides to stop being subtle. Keep proving it, Queen Elara. The realm needs what you're building. After she left, Elara stood on the balcony overlooking the merged territories, Thornwood's mountains in the north, Blackthorn's forests to the south, and between them, the land they were forging into something new. Kale joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. What are you thinking? That 6 months ago, I was broken and bleeding in the borderlands, thinking my life was over, Elara said quietly. And now I'm a queen of 2 kingdoms, a mother to your son, and apparently a political advisor to other monarchs seeking freedom from bad bonds. Regrets? Kale asked, though she could feel through the bond that he already knew the answer. Not one, Elara replied, turning in his arms to face him. Aldrich and Seraphina tried to destroy me. Instead, they freed me to become something they never could have imagined. Someone they should have feared from the beginning. Should I be concerned that my mate is developing a taste for political revenge? Kale teased, but his eyes were serious. Your mate is developing a taste for justice, Elara corrected. There's a difference. And speaking of justice, we received word today. Aldrich has been exiled to the border territories. Seraphina was annulled from the marriage and returned to her family in disgrace. And? Kale prompted, sensing there was more. And I feel nothing, Elara admitted. I thought I'd feel triumphant or vindicated or something. But mostly I just feel sorry for them. They had a chance at something real and threw it away for power that was always temporary. Meanwhile, we have this. She gestured at the view, at Eric playing in the courtyard below, at the life they were building. We have forever. Forever is a long time, little wolf, Kale warned. Ruling 2 kingdoms isn't going to get easier. There will be challenges, rebellions, people who want what we've built. Are you ready for that? Elara thought about the frightened girl who'd run from Blackthorn Castle 6 months ago, who'd contemplated drowning herself rather than facing her pain. She thought about the journey from broken to strong, from victim to queen, from someone who'd believed she was inadequate to someone who now ruled an empire. I'm ready, she said with absolute certainty. Because I'm not that weak little wolf anymore. I'm Elara Thornwood, queen of the North and South, destroyer of false narratives, and apparently, cosmic joke made manifest. If the moon goddess thought I couldn't handle this, she wouldn't have put me here. Kale's laugh was warm and proud. There's my savage mate. The woman who pins wolfkings and steals kingdoms. Our son is watching, Elara said primly, though her eyes danced with mischief. We should set a better example than discussing kingdom stealing. You're right, Kale agreed solemnly. Then, loud enough for Eric to hear, Eric. Come here. Your mother wants to tell you about the time she became queen by refusing to stay down. Again? Eric groaned, but he was smiling as he ran toward them. You've told that story 100 times. And you'll hear it 100 more, Elara promised, scooping him into her arms despite his protests that he was too old for such things. Because it's important to remember, sometimes the moon goddess breaks you down so she can build you back stronger. Sometimes your worst day becomes the doorway to your best life. And sometimes she looked at Kale, her mate, her partner, her equal. Sometimes the person who finds you at your lowest becomes the one who helps you reach your highest. That's sappy, Eric declared. Can we go back to the part where Papa beat up the bad prince? The violence was necessary, but not the point, Kale said, but he was grinning. The point is that your mother is the bravest person I know, and we're lucky she chose us. I am pretty great, Elara agreed, making Eric giggle. Then, more seriously, but so are both of you. We're building something here, something that will outlast us. A kingdom where wolves don't have to pretend to be weak to survive. Where bonds are honored instead of broken. Where second chances are possible. And where copper-haired traitors get exiled to the middle of nowhere, Eric added helpfully, making both his parents laugh. That too, Elara agreed. As the sun set over the twin kingdoms, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson, Elara felt the bond with Kale pulse with contentment and love and the bone-deep certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. She'd lost a prince who never deserved her. The moon goddess had given her a king who did. And together, they'd built an empire on the ashes of betrayal, proving once and for all that the weak little wolf everyone had underestimated was actually the most dangerous creature in the realm. She just hadn't known it yet. But she knew it now. And the world would never underestimate her again. The end.
If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it.